Due to copyright, I can't publish many audiobooks on YouTube. At our audiobook novel service, we offer access to over 300 full novels from Pocket FM, Webnovel, Audible, Wuxia, and more, all in high-quality audio format. Each novel is available with a one-time payment only. No subscriptions, no monthly payment, and no ads. Payments via PayPal or Ko-fi. To browse the full list of available novels, message me directly on Telegram or WhatsApp, or check out our full catalog on Discord. Chapter 941. Drunken Musician. Byron, after unleashing destruction upon everything, was forced to retreat, only to witness the continued devastation wrought by the ferocious clash of two formidable beings. He had to abandon the estate, withdrawing all the way into the city. Yet even here the ripples of battle reached with merciless persistence. The estate perched at the northern wing of Fugal, and behind it sprawled a forest that stretched toward distant mountains that melted into the horizon, their silhouettes particularly indistinct now beneath the night sky. The western, southern, and eastern wings of the city teemed with countless edifices, most belonging to the citizenry. Interspersed among them stood vital infrastructure, the Warp Gate, Public Citadel, Medical Center, and numerous others. Most of these facilities nestled somewhere between the northeastern wing and the estate, save for the water purification plant which lay buried deep beneath the city center, far below the surface. The city general library also claimed the heart of Fugal, standing alongside the Civic Hall. From the northwestern wing stretching all the way eastward, residential buildings housed the denizens. A tapestry of dwellings interwoven with parks, drainage systems, and smaller constellation chapels tucked delicately into the nooks and crannies of the urban landscape. But none of that mattered now. Upon entering Fugal, Byron had already noted the city's sparse population, and through his own folly, what few remained had been further reduced to dust by the shockwaves of his strikes. A pang of remorse flickered through him as he took solace in the fact that Northern wasn't awake to witness such a grim tableau. Yet greater havoc had been wreaked upon the entire city by the ongoing clash at the northern wing. The aftershocks of each collision reverberated as far as the southern walls and even the systems beyond. Blistering heat had vaporized the waters that once flowed smoothly through intricate channels across the city. Lush greenery had crumbled to ash, and not a single patch of ground remained unmarked by fissures that spread like veins of catastrophe through the earth. Countless buildings had either collapsed into rubble or sunk into the fractured ground. No single soul drew breath in the city, or so Byron thought. But there was one. Someone had survived. Ignoring the terrifying clash that kept thundering through the air like a violent heartbeat, Byron marched with deliberate steps toward this lone survivor, who had somehow endured the cataclysm. As he drew closer, what could only be described as a hauntingly beautiful melody drifted to his ears. String music, delicate notes plucked from some unseen instrument. Byron had never fancied himself a music enthusiast. The damned art had gained popularity in the later years of his youth, but he'd been too obsessed with the sword to pay it any mind. Or had he? He couldn't quite remember, so he dismissed the thought with a mental shrug and continued toward the source of the melody. The tune faltered here and there, but against the backdrop of such devastating ruin, it possessed a solemn, almost sacred quality, though somewhat chilling when he considered what manner of madman would sit playing stringed music amidst such catastrophe. No. How had such a person even survived in the first place? Byron's brows furrowed deeply as he pondered this, now closer to the source of the beautiful melody than ever before. He finally rounded a corner into a narrow street shrouded in darkness. Beyond the natural gloom of nightfall, an invisible pall of dread hung over the city, emanating from the sorry state of the crumbling buildings and fractured ground. Wooden benches had splintered from the force of the shockwaves, charred remnants of structures still smoldered, and from the depths of the fissures, a subtle molten glow cast eerie shadows across the ruins. Byron cared for none of this, however. His attention locked entirely on the figure seated in the center of the street, utterly indifferent to the devastation surrounding him, playing a delicate tune with a flushed expression on his face. Byron arched a single brow. Is he drunk? In that moment, the man paused, his fingers stilling on the strings. The music died, allowing a terrifying silence to slap against the devastated landscape. Oh, there's a living soul, the stranger remarked, his voice carrying an unsettling lightness. Slowly, the man rose from his seated position on the ground, making a half-hearted attempt to dust off his tattered clothes. Byron studied the apparent drunkard with a keen, calculating gaze that missed nothing. The stranger suddenly proclaimed, his voice echoing through the desolate street. "The ends have descended. All has forsaken us." He paused abruptly, studying Byron with newfound interest. Then, with deliberate slowness, he tilted up the bucket hat he wore, revealing a bloody crimson glow that pulsed subtly from beneath its brim. In that moment, such profound dread washed over Byron that he involuntarily stepped backward before catching himself. The man tilted his head, a knowing smile playing at his lips. "You look like him, but you're not him." Byron felt the question form in his mind. Who? When a terrifying presence suddenly registered in the world. Every instinct screamed for him to glance back toward the estate, yet he dared not tear his gaze from the enigmatic stranger before him. The presence was enormous, overwhelmingly powerful, most likely an essence manifestation like Paragon Rizel had displayed. He froze in place, paralyzed by indecision. The stranger, however, merely smiled, leisurely dropping the wooden guitar and rod of string he'd been holding. He dusted his palms together with theatrical deliberateness, as if ridding himself of more than just debris. Then his voice came with a peculiar lilt. The clash of two paragons. HM. A story worth singing about. The Sword King's hand drifted instinctively to the dark mortal blade at his hip. The stranger's eyes tracked the movement with unhurried precision. He wagged a finger admonishingly. No, don't do that. The city has already suffered enough. His voice softened to something almost philosophical. Blinded to the values of reality and existence, those two have let loose the strings that make them monsters. Many have perished because of their stupidity, and yet they probably claim to be anchors of humanity. A sardonic chuckle escaped him. We do live in a funny world. Truly its end has arrived. He met Byron's gaze directly now, something ancient lurking behind his eyes. Let us not be like them. Okay, friend. Byron regarded him with undisguised wariness. I am not your friend. The stranger shrugged with theatrical nonchalance. Yes, you are not. But you seem to have one or two things to do with my brother, which makes you, he paused meaningfully, a friend nonetheless. He offered a slight bow and turned away, lifting his hat in farewell as he bid Byron goodbye. Till we meet again. For the fleeting moment his hat was raised. A shock of white, snowy hair, short, wavy strands, danced softly in the night breeze. The whiteness possessed a luminous purity unlike any Byron had ever witnessed. Even his own white hair paled in comparison, lacking that pearlescent quality. The only person he could recall with such distinctive coloring was Master. Chapter 942. What is Burning Storm? Dante's faceless head tilted, carrying a soft, prismatic cascade of light with the whisper of movement. His voice rippled with restrained emotion. Friend, this does not have to be the end. Burning Storm's weakened gaze locked onto the radiant figure hovering before him, a dying star facing a newborn sun. Will. Each breath rattled from his chest like thunder, making the very air tremble around him. You. Spare me? The luminous void where Dante's face should be creased in what might have been compassion had features existed there. Of course, my friend. I will spare you by all means. To Geth. Burning Storm's voice sliced through the promise. I'm still gonna stop you from taking over the Central Plains. Dante froze mid-sentence, the aura surrounding him crumbling like a fallen empire. The illuminating light from the mirrors dimmed, as if the room itself held its breath. Then his voice emerged, hollow as an abandoned grave. I see you have made up your mind. He lifted his sword with the slow inevitability of nightfall. If you so much desire death, then you can have it. Burning Storm suddenly exhaled. Infernal heat erupted from the massive nostrils of his bull head, flames dancing like vengeful spirits in the space between them. His eyes ignited, twin furnaces blazing with defiance, as if welcoming the embrace of oblivion itself if it meant this final strike would not be in vain. For years since ascending to Paragon, a question had gnawed at Burning Storm's consciousness. Why was the chasm between Paragon and Luminary so vast? The obvious answer had always hung before him. A Paragon's soul core was immense, requiring eons to saturate with essence. Worse still, the cores of lesser beings offered mere droplets in an ocean of need. Only Maelstrom cores could provide substance, yet these were precious rarities. Even in Lithia, where such cores had recently become available, he lacked both time and freedom to select ideal souls. Yet despite this apparent truth staring him in the face, Rizel had persisted, digging beneath surface answers, hunting for deeper understanding. How truly insurmountable was this gap? Was it merely about distance to be traveled? Or perhaps the nature of one's very core itself? Breaking through from Paragon had felt like hurling himself against an adamantine wall, each strike, each effort, absorbed without so much as a hairline fracture to show for it. This unyielding barrier had redirected his quest toward uncovering the mysteries of his true name. In that crucible of frustration, Burning Storm had unearthed something profound about true names, a revelation that spawned an even more fundamental question. True name, talent, soul core. Which of these three pillars truly formed the keystone of a drifter's power? For centuries, his conviction had rested on the primacy of the soul core, that foundation of all things, first to form in a drifter's nascent existence, maturing only when they conquered a rift and claimed its essence. But as the ancient texts about true names unfolded their secrets beneath his scrutiny, he recognized the magnitude of his misunderstanding. This epiphany had driven him across the breadth of the Central Plains and beyond, to the furthest corners of the world. Beneath his formidable exterior lurked a wanderer, a nomad without hearth or home, whose footsteps had traced continents in pursuit of truth. Such relentless wandering had granted him insights surpassing nearly all scholars in the Central Plains, perhaps with the exception of Riamgard. Yet even Burning Storm recognized that across the wider world, seers and sages existed who had delved deeper into the essence of true names, understanding how they anchored a being's fundamental power. And just as the oldest wisdom proclaimed, Rizel had discovered that true names were not merely labels but tethers, anchors cast into the primordial source of one's soul. The soul source, a genesis stretching back to the dawn of creation. Ancient scrolls whispered of millennia past when the world existed as nothing but a vast ocean of soul essence, formless and flowing, until cosmic forces rent it asunder into 12 distinct wellsprings of power. Through his journeys across the mist-shrouded monasteries of the eastern continent, Rizel had unraveled a truth long guarded by its mystics. True names were the cosmic cords binding souls to their primordial fountainheads. The deeper one's communion with their true name, the more profound their mastery of their innate talent became. For talent itself was merely the manifestation, the visible shimmer on water, of the connection between soul and source. When a core first coalesced within a drifter, the anchor was forged. When that core matured through triumph over a rift, the anchor plunged deep into the wellspring of power. In the traditions of the Eastern continent, novice drifters were taught first to meditate upon their true names, to taste the syllables that define their existence. The elders believed potency resided in this understanding. But all of Central Plains had miscalculated the true path. Since this revelation, Paragon Rizel had devoted himself to a singular pursuit, grasping the essence concealed within his true name. Burning Storm. What cryptic forces lay behind this anchor, and to which of the 12 sources was his soul eternally tethered? What hidden thread connected his name and his talent, Velocity Sovereign? Initially, the relationship eluded him. These seemed disparate gifts with no common foundation. But as his introspection deepened, as he peeled back layers of his abilities and the very fabric of his essence manifestation, an undeniable pattern emerged that should have been transparent from the beginning. Motion. Rizel's walker ability permitted him to harvest energy from movement itself. Subtle at first, a mere trickle of power. Yet with each step taken, each distance crossed, he grew stronger. Upon ascending to master, this ability had amplified exponentially. Now he could siphon the very kinetic essence from others around him, absorbing the flutter of a nearby wing, the rush of a swinging blade, the hurried breath of an opponent. He could accumulate momentum without physical exertion, stockpiling it like a miser hoards gold. He could sharpen motion itself until it became a cutting edge that cleaved through matter as if it were mist. Yet his true name had seemed a contradictory emblem of fire and tempest, elements that raged and thrashed with seemingly no connection to his velocity-based talents. This discordance had blinded him to the elegant truth. A storm is not merely wind and flame. It is motion incarnate. Every thunderhead that roils across the sky, every ember that whirls in a firestorm, every gust that reshapes the earth. These are not static entities but expressions of momentum given will. The burning storm represented the ultimate metaphor for volatile, unrelenting, and chaotic motion. Not passive or gentle but violent, defiant, alive. His essence manifestation was his will crystallized into form. Conceptually, his will and essence were indistinguishable, two names for the same primal force. But what, then, did a luminary truly wield? If a paragon's power stemmed from understanding that their essence manifestation was shaped by the interplay between true name and talent, as his burning storm and velocity sovereign unified through motion, they still perceived this connection as something external. Something to study, to adapt, to express. What, then, was a luminary? The radiant rank. What transcendental insight marked this threshold? With every desperate movement, with every thunderous exchange that shook the very foundations around them, the question burned deeper in Paragon Rizel's heart. Now, with death's shadow looming over him, the desperation clenched his core with unprecedented urgency. He was desperate, more than ever before, to answer that final question. Chapter 943, One Hell of a Strong Man. Byron stood rooted to the spot, his jaw a little slack. Brother! That stranger had called himself his master's brother. When those words first hung in the air, Byron's mind scrambled to make sense of them. He'd thought the man meant Rizel. But this tattered figure was nothing like Rizel. When he lifted his hat to bid him farewell, that snowy white hair instantly reminded Byron of his master. He knew little about the Void Lord, as he called him. His master's foundation was murky at best. His parents weren't really his parents, he seemed to come from elsewhere, and somehow the present version of his master had existed before in another world. It was a tangled web of nonsense too complex for any single human to comprehend. Yet all this made his master an extraordinary and superior being in Byron's eyes. The realization that his master's brother had casually revealed himself sent a thrill through him. His heart leaped at the thought of sharing this news with Northern. But that wasn't even the most significant part. What truly mattered was that his master's brother supposedly came from the Central Plains' mightiest nation, the continent's undisputed powerhouse. And if rumors were true, he wasn't just from there. He was a prince, wasn't he? Then there was the terrifying aura he radiated. Byron sensed the might of a paragon, certainly, but this was something far more sinister. His power carried a different depth and potency than other paragons, even the two currently locked in battle. Something about this man triggered a flash of memory, an opponent who once made Byron's skin prickle with icy goosebumps, though the face was not clear. What is he doing here? Have they started to move? The idea that this prince had journeyed all the way to Fugal just to meet Northern seemed absurd. Pure nonsense. Northern had been alive this whole time, yet none of them had made the effrontery to meet before. Why now? Byron considered his master's rising fame as Rian from the non-combative school. But his instincts whispered otherwise. In the massive ripple effect caused by Dante's revolution, his master's newly emerging fame seemed too fragile to attract attention from a powerhouse like Riemgard, enough to send their prince. Besides, if seeking Northern was the goal, he wouldn't come to Fugal. He'd go to Variolania. Byron rubbed his dry chin, his thoughts churning. Unease settled in his gut like a stone. If Riemgard became involved, wouldn't the situation spiral beyond control? Was his master prepared to face his brothers? Was his master strong enough? Or did the young lad need more rigorous training? The questions swirled like autumn leaves in his troubled mind. and not having answers at the moment troubled him even more. The earth-shattering clash between the two paragons drowned out everything else from Byron's vantage point. Reizel's business was Reizel's to handle. Unless Northern commanded otherwise, Byron had no right to interfere or make decisions that encroached upon his master's authority. Byron exhaled deeply and rested his hand on his sword. His brows suddenly shot up, head tilting in alert. He stepped away cautiously, and in that instant, something crashed onto the spot where he'd been standing. The already weakened ground and debris exploded skyward. A cloud of dust billowed outward, shrouding the area in a thick, impenetrable veil. For several heartbeats, Byron could see nothing. Then gradually, the dust began to settle, revealing a silhouette advancing through the haze. As the figure emerged from the dust cloud, Byron's face hardened into a frown. Before him stood a remarkably tall man with a pale face and dark irises, like twin pools of midnight. His delicate lips appeared sculpted, his features arranged in flawless harmony. Devastatingly handsome, his raven-black hair flowed long and free in the hot, tension-filled winds that swept through the ruined city. The stranger studied Byron for several seconds, his own brow furrowing. Then his rough voice sliced through the silence. "What is a relic of the old age doing living in a new age?" A knowing smile curved Byron's lips. "You are dangerously powerful, not too powerful, but what I sense from you does not conform to the concept of power in this world. What are you?" The black-haired man blinked in surprise, his face draining of what little color it had as he stared at Byron with newfound interest. Then, slowly, his mouth curled into a smile. "They call me the Prophet." Byron's expression remained stone-cold, unimpressed. The Prophet's gaze swept across the destruction surrounding them. "It seems I am late to the party." He exhaled softly, the sound almost musical, and took a step forward. Byron shifted his stance, blocking the path with a deceptively casual movement. A smile played at the corners of his mouth. "I am not sorry, but you cannot go there." The Prophet's eyebrows arched elegantly as he met Byron's steady gaze. "And why would that be?" "Well, since I am an ally to one of the gentlemen over there, an expensive ally, I make it my business to prevent anything from disturbing them." Byron's smile widened. "Out of choice, though, not out of necessity." The Prophet studied him, eyes narrowing slightly as he assessed the man before him. Finally, he sighed. "What did Paragon Reizel promise you? Money? We have more to offer. We can give you authority in the new world we will carve upon the surface of trial." Byron dismissed the offer with a flick of his wrist, as if swatting away an annoying insect. "I've held those treasures too many times. They've grown inconsequential." His eyes glinted with anticipation. "If there's anything you can give me right now, it would be a worthy fight. Haven't had one in a long, long time." The Prophet regarded him strangely, his midnight gaze dropping to the sword at Byron's waist. He winced visibly. "I am no swordsman." A mischievous smile danced across Byron's face. "It doesn't take one to fight one. All it takes is one hell of a strong man." Chapter 944. Road to Luminary. The ground quaked, countless shards of stone cracked and shattered into the air. Heat layered the earth like a suffocating blanket, creating a pocket where space itself seemed to pause, the violent upheaval surrounding the area slowing to a crawl. Time itself faltered. Their collision resonated with such intensity that space trembled and the earth, not just the land, but the very foundations beneath, threatened to cave in on itself. Burning Storm maintained his momentum, still protecting the complex. It stood as an odd sight. Despite the damnation of everything around it, such a fine structure remained untouched. Calling it a stark contrast was an understatement. Every building nearby had been leveled to piles of rubble. Some fell when Lieutenant Dante created a reflection strike that battered Burning Storm, crushing and cleaving structures alongside him. Others crumbled when Paragon Reizel rammed through Fractured Light's mirror, a mirror holding hundreds of reflected attacks that, once shattered, spilled into reality, savagely tearing through Burning Storm and his surroundings. The raging crimson bull of flames that had charged fiercely and fearlessly through the terrain was no more. Now only a dying relic of an indomitable battle remained. Yet that green light persisted, that stubborn light still shimmering in the depths of his eyes. That light refused to die. Burning Storm would not surrender. His essence had hit rock bottom. Forcefully maintaining the essence manifestation through sheer will was becoming more daunting than the battle itself. His soul was tearing apart, his mind fracturing too. But his stubbornness burned brighter than his pain. The question echoed a million times in his head, drowning everything else happening around him beneath its weight. What was the true breaking point? Radiant rank. What power did a luminary truly wield? Fractured light flashed, trailed by a cascade of slicing attacks that flowed like light itself, too swift to catch with mortal eyes. A terrible tearing of thunder rippled through the air. Burning Storm coated himself in momentum, but it dwindled. Nothing remained to sustain such ability. His talent abilities withered like flames starved of oxygen. And still he clung, desperately grasping one ability while clutching at another. Why? Why? What is wrong with you? The echoing voice of his revolutionary friend meant nothing as he anchored his will on maintaining this form a moment longer, holding the building intact just one more time. In that desperate struggle, something shifted within him. He became unrecognizable to himself, sensing every tiny movement yet somehow feeling none of it. His identity unraveled, leaving only pure motion. Ironic how he felt like the very anchor connecting his true name to his soul source. In that moment when only raw will sustained him, he felt so much like Paragon Rizel's mind seemed to fade into a muffled haze. What was the true breaking point into radiant rank? What power did a luminary truly wield? A paragon perceived the relationship between their true name and talent as an external connection. Something to discover, to harness, to express. But Burning Storm no longer felt like a person expressing. He was it. A strange seed unfurled in the soil of his mind. Could that breaking point he had sought be the moment where one ceased merely doing and simply needed to be? That pivotal threshold where this relationship isn't merely anchored to the soul, but fused into the very essence of one's will. That sublime instant when you transcend yourself. The first step on a path stretching far beyond humanity, a journey of transcendence. Even with a fading mind, Paragon Rizel found profound peace in the revelation. He knew it. He felt it. He had discovered something elemental. He had become something more. In that moment, his entire world transformed. Everything shifting, reconfiguring until he himself was the Burning Storm. For the first time in his entire life, Paragon Rizel glimpsed into his soul world. And with that vision came the voice of Ul, unheard for decades, yet instantly familiar. Congratulations, you have broken the threshold of your soul. Your journey to the zenith of transcendent has begun. Your soul rank is evolving. Paragon Rizel heard Ul's voice with crystal clarity but could scarcely focus on it. The reality of his soul unfurling before him was too overwhelming. Soul world. What was a soul world? What Rizel witnessed granted him understanding beyond imagination. A thunderbolt of insight striking through his consciousness. A soul world. The inner universe of a being. The metaphysical domain reflecting the deepest, truest form of existence. The convergence of true name, talent, and soul core, projected outward into reality. When a drifter ascends to luminary, they no longer simply wield power. They become a space where their truth governs all laws. A soul world operated on three vital engines of functionality. True name. The true name transcends mere words. It exists as a universal constant defining the essence of a soul across all timelines, iterations, and dimensions. The soul world is that name given form. Its meaning, weight, and symbolic structure manifested as a living domain. Talent. Talent manifests one's connection to the soul source. Within the soul world, talent abandons the constraints of mere ability. It transforms into the very law of reality. In the realm Rizel now beheld, his velocity sovereign no longer functioned as simple movement or kinetic force. It pulsed as an absolute law of motion. In his soul world, Possibilities sprawled before him, mind staggering in their vastness. Things moved only as he willed. Time itself could stutter at his command, and inertia could reverse its eternal flow. Soul core. While the true name formed the foundation, and talent the expression, the soul core served as the power plant, fueling the transformation of inner identity into outer reality. As Rizel sensed the inner workings of his soul, he felt a nudging, a subconscious knowing as his gaze fell upon the world of flames below. Once his soul core evolved, it would channel essence directly into his soul world, allowing his inner reality to override the environment surrounding him. As Rizel plunged into something infinitely vaster than himself, he first beheld a sky, not merely above but everywhere. The horizon curved impossibly in all directions, forming a dome of tempestuous winds and pulsating auroras, each gust emblazoned with veins of crimson fire and molten gold. Clouds refused stillness. They spiraled in perfect orbits around invisible axes, emanating rhythms that mirrored the cadence of a cosmic heartbeat. The landscape below defied conventional form, jagged yet fluid, like volcanic glass frozen at the peak of cataclysm. Rivers coiled in mesmerizing spirals, twisting upward against gravity's pull. Flames streamed horizontally, suspended along invisible pathways that obeyed no law but their own. Nothing remained stationary, not even Rizel's own heartbeat, which resonated outside his chest in phantasmal echoes that rippled through space. And at the precise center of this impossible realm, a colossal obsidian spire hung suspended mid-air, encircled by concentric rings of perpetual storm. A throne crafted of ash and gale, eternally in motion. Each rotation a divine decree, each gust an inviolable edict. This was the seat of Rizel's radiant will. Chapter 945. The Sweet Taste of Defeat. Black swords materialized in the air, flying at a terrifying speed. They weren't just a blur of darkness, but something too swift to even be called a blur. Byran remained casual, a smooth smile playing on his lips as he nonchalantly swatted the blades away with his bare hands. The simple motion of his hands, the flick of his wrist, carried such astonishing force that each black blade shattered upon contact. The Black Prophet spread his arms wide, conjuring hundreds of thousands of black swords. The air trembled and death's cold grip held the world in pause for a moment. Thunder rumbled in the distance, not from their battle, but the nature of it seemed to add to the foreboding clash between Byran and the Prophet. Byran lifted his gaze to the endless array of black swords hovering above, a sweet smile dancing across his face. The prospect of so many swords raining down upon him felt soothing, the challenge of blocking each one making his heart race with excitement. Yet his smile faltered moments later as he regarded the Prophet. Is it possible to increase their durability? How about you just use real swords instead of these measly extensions of your ability? Can you do that? Byron's voice remained sincere despite the storm of devastation hovering above him. His question twisted the Prophet's face with darkness and damnation. Then he roared. Die! Byron clicked his tongue. Seriously? He placed his hand on the dark mortal and became a blur. Yet this blur never left its original position before solidifying back into Byran, who relaxed his pose and sighed. He folded his arms and wore a pleased smile while gazing upward. Silver lights shot into the air, matching the dark swords in number. A terrifying yet mesmerizing sight as hundreds of thousands of black streaks met hundreds of thousands of white streaks. An explosion of force radiated across the entire landscape, tearing through debris with violent shockwaves. Heaps of destroyed buildings vanished into clear ground, as pristine as if nothing had ever existed in this place before. The Prophet stood frozen as all his swords were struck down by, not counterswords but mere sword strikes. He knew what they were, yet questioned with all sanity how this could be possible. The power of the old age remained a myth even to beings like him. They had existed in a time before records, and even then for only a short era. The Prophet Kal knew of a legend that spoke of a war, a conflict that ended the age and birthed the rift. It marked the beginning of the new era and the dawn of all. No one had ever known what they looked like, but there existed ways to vaguely tell. The only clue was the ambience of the man who stood before him. While the essence of his soul appeared similar to humans of this era, it was also different, more vast, more terrifying, more original. But Call had never imagined they would wield such terrifying power that he would be made to shiver in this manner. His face contorted with irritation, frustration, and rage. Every time, I get closer to my goal and someone, shows up. It was as if the universe itself had conspired to destroy everything he had built each and every single time he was close to the end. Call was fed up, exhausted from failing. This plan needed to succeed. He was desperate, and this was his last chance. He narrowed his eyes, studying the man carefully. But why can I detect a faint whiff of void from him? His brows furrowed as the question burrowed deeper into his mind. Byron stood too far away to hear. Meanwhile, the Sword King had begun to move. Call undoubtedly had numerous tricks hidden away. He hadn't journeyed all this point without amassing a sufficient arsenal. Yet he refused to waste everything fighting a variable he'd never accounted for. So he breathed, exhaling softly. Then he cast Byron one final glance. You and I will definitely meet again. Byron already gripped the dark mortal in his hands. Just as Call prepared to retreat, his gaze fixed on the sword, recognition flashing across his face. A slight smile curled his lips. At least luck favors me today. He opened his hand and thrust it forward. His palm split open, revealing an eye of absolute darkness. Then Call's voice thundered across the landscape. Awaken! Blood of retribution! Byron had already drawn back the sword, poised to unleash a strike that would likely devastate Call alongside the surrounding terrain. As he prepared to deliver the sword strike, he suddenly frowned and halted, dropping the weapon. Barely a fraction of a second later, a fountain of blood erupted from his shoulder, spraying violently into the air. Byron's face drained of color as he staggered sideways. His vision got blurry and his head felt dizzy. Blood washed down the right side of his body, splattered across his face too. He spared another glance at the sword and watched as white cracks spread across its surface. A heartbeat later, the blade had vanished entirely, and so had Call, and he was gravely wounded. Byron smiled contentedly, then slumped to the ground, gazing up at the dark sky. Ah, so refreshing. I certainly haven't felt such exquisite pain and raw anger in ages. Refreshing indeed. He slowly lowered his back to the ground, resting in his own pool of blood while staring skyward with eyes that sparkled like distant stars. After savoring the strange sweetness of pain and defeat for several moments, even though his enemy had somehow tricked him and escaped, he raised 2 fingers and traced an intricate pattern across his arm. As he slowly rose to his feet, his wounded arm, complexion, and blood-soaked clothes began to glow with gentle white light, reverting to pristine condition as if the terrifying cleave had never occurred. Though he seemed to overlook the crimson droplets that still clung to the side of his jaw and neck. Chapter 946. Death March. Paragon Rizel stood transfixed, his soul quivering with rapture at the vision before him. Words crumbled like dust before this sublime revelation. A wave of euphoria crashed through him, drowning every achievement, every pleasure he had ever known in this world. It struck deeper than even the paradisiacal release he once found nestled between his wife's thighs. Yet this sweet, intoxicating euphoria revealed precisely what he would soon forfeit. Bitter regret twisted within him that it had taken reaching this precipice to grasp such a simple truth. The undeniable reality glared at him mercilessly. He was dying, and now, the cruelty cut deeper because he had glimpsed a soul truth so profound. Such revelations never came without cost. He had received the message that his soul was evolving, and he lay immobile on the ground, his manifestation dissolved into nothingness. He had become as vulnerable as any mortal human, and he knew that he did not have enough life vigor to see his core reform. The pain and sacrifice that had forged him into a paragon had been excruciating. This transformation would demand tenfold more. He knew with cold certainty he couldn't survive this. Yet Byron harbored no despair over his fate. He still had options, ways to sabotage Dante's mission. Here and now, this revelation alone could dramatically shift the balance against Dante. As a final act of defiance, he could unleash a suicidal assault, one that would obliterate not just Dante but all of Fugal. The neighboring towns and cities might not escape the devastation. A luminary's power, after all, always remained shrouded in mystery, rarely discussed and never witnessed in full. But Byron knew with grim satisfaction, it would be enough to end his friend's life. However, he recoiled from the thought. To kill Dante, he couldn't bear such a crushing burden. The truth stung like salt in an open wound. He had helped shape what Dante had become. It was his fault. His whispered questions that had planted seeds of doubt and ambition. Questions that had charted their shared path. Rizel had found his chance at redemption, but Dante never did. To destroy his friend for becoming the very monster he had molded seemed the height of hypocrisy. Even if it was just a shred of dignity and loyalty, Rizel clung to it with desperate fingers. He recognized the selfishness threading through his hesitation. A selfish choice, indeed. But another reason anchored him against the suicidal attack. One that outweighed all others. His wife and unborn child. They wouldn't survive. The certainty of this settled in his chest like a stone. If this was to be his final act, it needed to be something more. Something to pass this revelation to another soul. Someone deserving. Paragon Rizel's body lay sprawled lifelessly on the ground. Nearby, Dante stood with crumbling composure, struggling to maintain a stern gaze while unshed tears glazed his eyes, threatening to spill down his cheeks. He stared at his friend's dying form, hand trembling, hesitant to deliver the final blow. His own essence manifestation had dissolved not from essence depletion, but by choice. Then, a silent shuddering rippled through reality. The world suddenly grew heavy, as though gravity itself had multiplied tenfold. Dante paled, his eyes widening as the sensation washed over him. A power that made even him, a paragon, quake with primal fear. He stumbled backward, no longer willing to approach his dying friend. What metamorphosis was overtaking Rizel? He couldn't be. The assumption seemed wild, but if there was one truth about Rizel, it was that his friend perpetually defied impossibilities. The deduction crystallized in Dante's mind. Rizel teetered on the precipice of becoming a luminary. Dread coiled around Dante's throat. What would become of his meticulous plans? All his effort. If Rizel ascended to luminary and set himself against his cause, he would be stopped. He would fail, watching a decade of planning crumble to ash. Now that the revolution had finally ignited, he couldn't allow it to be smothered. These fears mounted within his chest, crushing his resolve. And yet, he dared not move a single step toward that abominable will pressing upon the air. Its scale loomed so massive and incomprehensible that Dante felt he would be crushed beneath it at the slightest movement. Like the sky itself preparing to collapse upon him, he cowered, a helpless child with no escape from its boundless, terrible weight. Was this the will of a luminary? Understanding slipped from Dante's grasp as the pressure intensified, bearing down like an ocean's weight. Lieutenant Dante's forehead beaded with sweat, droplets carving paths down his temple as his eyes darted frantically, searching for solutions where none existed. Then movement. Paragon Rizel's body rose, no longer the friend Dante had known. His eyes glowed like the depths of a primordial volcano, lifeless yet burning with unfathomable heat. His flesh had blackened, charred yet still actively burning, with veins of molten fire tracing intricate patterns across his skin. He took a step forward. The world quaked in response. Lieutenant Dante's heart plummeted into his gut, his stomach twisting with a primal need to flee. His bowels threatened to betray him. Burning Storm took another step. Again, reality itself shuddered in acknowledgement. The next tremor sent Dante's heart spiraling deeper into dread. He tensed, white-knuckled fingers clutching his sword as he prepared to summon his essence manifestation once more. Soul essence still pulsed within him, enough for one final stand. But to his astonishment, Burning Storm showed no sign of approaching him with malice, or approaching him at all. The prophet materialized in the clearing, his gaze sweeping across the devastation before settling on Dante, then shifting to Burning Storm's retreating form. A deep frown carved lines into the prophet's darkly handsome features. "What are you doing? You should kill him." Dante hurled a venomous glare at the prophet, his eyes like twin blades. "Dare move from that spot, and I will kill you myself." The prophet clicked his tongue, irritation radiating from him in palpable waves. Call understood the sacred bond Dante shared with the dying man. Still, the sight of Burning Storm, walking like some unholy revenant despite resembling a living corpse, sent ice through his veins. Yet he recognized the impossible position before them. A suicidal attack from Rizel would claim not only his wife's life but those of every government official nearby. Resigned, he watched the half-born luminary continue his inexorable march. Meanwhile, Rizel's footfalls grew heavier, each step imprinting the earth beneath him. His will pressed upon the air with crushing force as his charred lips parted, unleashing a single name that emerged as a guttural rasp. Rian. The syllables rippled outward, carrying impossible weight. A profound, chilling tremor burrowed into the very depths of Northern's soul expanse, penetrating his soul world. And suddenly, Northern's blue eyes flared open. Chapter 947. Indomitable Will. Northern's rest was soothing, deep, a solace that pulled at his very soul. It was a rest he craved, needed, from everything. Chaos had drained his body to the core, and using Omniform with his two clones had only deepened his exhaustion. The deep sleep seized control over him, not something he could fight, but something he savored deeply. And he was beginning to savor it too much. Northern felt a subtle crawl of something slipping past his mental boundary. Yet he remained powerless, trapped. If anything, all of it felt like a dream, a tempting escape from the burden of living, the weight of being human. It continued, lulling him deeper and deeper into the abyss of rest, until a terrifying pressure crashed down on him and his name crawled out in a familiar voice. It was as though the world itself had summoned him. Northern, lost in the depths of his dream, couldn't grasp what was happening, but he recognized the voice. The weight of it pressed against him, making his heart ache in a strange manner. Clinging to that ache, he began to retrace his steps back to consciousness. What was he supposed to be doing now? Right, there was a war brewing with Lieutenant Dante and he was supposed to help. But the fatigue clung to him like an iron shroud, unlike anything he had ever experienced before. He wouldn't mind more sleep. At the same time, an undeniable taste of agony wrenched his heart, sprouting worry. He was worried about his self-proclaimed mentor. Northern continued to tear upwards through the haze of his mind, fighting against the sweet siren call of rest. It was the most grueling battle he had faced in a long while. Like wrestling with his own shadow, he had to deprive himself of solace, to struggle against the very peace his body screamed for. Every step upward brought a pang of regret, each one offering a tempting whisper to surrender, to sink back into oblivion. But he couldn't yield, so he fought relentlessly, waging war against himself to wake up. And when he finally breached the surface, that critical point where he fully recognized the dread and agony soaked in the voice, his eyes flared open like twin azure stars igniting in darkness. The charred body of Paragon Rizel trudged forward in a macabre march, his voice scraping through the air like metal dragged across stone. Rian. Dante and the prophet observed from behind, their faces telling different stories. Dante's expression crumbled, a monument of sorrow breaking apart piece by piece. The prophet, meanwhile, remained unmoved by the grotesque spectacle, his face a mask of cold indifference. He only frowned because the name struck a chord of familiarity in his mind. But the weight of other schemes burdened him too heavily to dwell on it. Things had unfolded according to plan for so long, until he had inserted that damned boy into the equation. Call had believed he could orchestrate it all. He had crafted his schemes with surgical precision, gifting Ruffsberg the final hack to force open rifts, while planting a seed in his mind. A hunger for Central Plains to grow stronger. A drive that had pushed Ruffsburg to launch his monstrous Dark Continent initiative. Sending students to a crucible where they would be hammered into weapons of brutality. Of course, Call merely sought to use the smoke screen of violence and the intoxication of war to weaken the conceptual boundary imprisoning his master. He had seized the perfect chance to bait the child of prophecy, a being unfettered by the concepts of Ultrarel, a wild card in a deck of fixed outcomes. Yet the boy he thought he could manipulate like a puppet on strings had transformed into a dagger between his ribs, twisting deeper with each passing moment. Call's teeth ground together as his mind churned through it all. Frustration boiled through his veins as he replayed their encounter from mere hours ago. He had expected to see terror etched across that face. Instead, he'd found stillness. A calm as deep as ancient waters. There was no denying it, the bastard had evolved. He had metamorphosed from the impulsive, reckless Northern into something calculated, measured. Rian. The name reverberated through the chambers of Call's mind like a death knell. Ri-an. In an instant, Call's eyes snapped wide open, realization striking like lightning. Stop him! The words tore from his throat. He lunged forward, but Lieutenant Dante's expression hardened. The lieutenant dropped low and pivoted, a blur of motion, driving his fist into the prophet's abdomen with bone-crushing force. The impact catapulted Call backward, his body carving a trench through the rubble as he tumbled across the ground. In that precise moment, the space before Rizel began to shimmer and distort, reality itself fraying at the edges. Call sprang to his feet, unblemished as though the devastating blow had never landed. His voice erupted, laced with desperation. What in death's name are you doing? I said stop him. He didn't fully comprehend what was unfolding, but primal instinct clawed at his insides, screaming danger. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Dante hesitated, torn between duty and friendship. Confusion etched across his features as the fabric of space tore open before Rizel's charred form. The once proud metropolis lay in ruins around them, a concrete jungle reduced to a wasteland of rubble and dust. What had been a skyline of towering structures now resembled barren earth awaiting the first foundations. The devastation had cleared all obstructions, making it possible for anyone to witness what was unfolding, regardless of distance. Even Byran, approaching from the opposite direction, suddenly froze mid-stride as he sensed his master's presence rippling through the air. A whisper of a smile crept across his lips as the limitless void began to tear open, a wound in reality itself. First emerged pristine white hair, luminous as freshly fallen snow, cascading just above the brow, parted elegantly in the center, each strand dancing like silver threads in the whisper of wind. Those resplendent blue eyes, deep as mountain lakes, clear as winter sky, gazed somberly at the charred figure before him. Northern's heart constricted, a vice of agony and grief twisting something fundamental within him as he beheld the remains of what once was burning storm. Those remains continued to call to him with a will so powerful it seemed to bend reality itself to its purpose. How else could it reach across worlds, across realities so vastly different from their own? Northern's lips quivered, words trapped in his throat. His first attempt yielded only silence. On the second try, his voice emerged fragile as spun glass. Burning. Storm. Rian. The scorched apparition finally halted before him and sank to one knee in supplication. Northern felt something more profound than mere presence, a gravitational pull of will. Burning Storm was drawing him forward with an inexorable force beyond comprehension. Where this pull would lead, Northern couldn't fathom. But he would follow. Yet beyond all else, what pierced his heart most deeply was the spectral notification hovering before his eyes like a ghostly herald. You can absorb name. Chapter 948. Weight of Revelation. Northern slowly closed his eyes and took a step closer. Then he touched the Paragon's forehead. Paragon Rizel wasn't dying. He was already dead. Yet his will burned so fiercely that his soul refused to perish. His true name neither wavered nor dissolved despite death's cold grip. His will stood indomitable, terrifying in its resolve. As Northern's fingers met the cold skin, a world unfolded before him. A world that defied logic and reason. Beyond that chaotic vision came a fundamental understanding of what Burning Storm truly was. Not merely the true name, but the very depths of his soul, the tapestry of his memories, every hardship and triumph that had forged him into being. His father, Veiled Light. Though Veiled Light had revealed himself as a greedy man who bore no shame for his weaknesses and limitations, Burning Storm loved him still. Everything he was had sprouted from a single seed, the yearning to make his father proud. He never buckled under those expectations. Instead, they warmed his heart with gladness and gratitude. That his father expected greatness of him, that his father yearned for him to become the strongest man in the Central Plains. Burning Storm felt these expectations like a guiding star, his father his most steadfast supporter. Despite the man's atrocities, Burning Storm could never bring himself to punish him, to hate him. This conflict drove him ultimately to abandon the government and pursue, relentlessly, true strength. And his friend, Burning Storm's chest tightened whenever he thought of Dante. Regret haunted his every step for how he had abandoned him, for poisoning that innocent boy's heart with hatred for the world. But he was a coward. He fled from his greatest mistake. He wandered from place to place seeking knowledge, but deep in his heart, he knew he was merely running from the monster he had created. When Dante ascended to paragon status and running became impossible, instead of standing firm, he retreated again. His final answer nothing more than a whispered no. 100 paths existed that might have prevented this disaster, but Burning Storm turned away from them all. Just as in his final moment, he shrank from making the difficult decision, instead placing that burden on someone who had no stake in the matter at all. Burning Storm's self-loathing ran like poison through his veins. He despised himself for stubbornly choosing to love Leary. That young, beautiful, and ambitious woman deserved better. She shouldn't have had to bear the child of such a coward. She had illuminated his world, helped him perceive life through a different lens, and yet he had given nothing in return. He couldn't even claim to be a proper father. All these emotions twisted and coiled inside Burning Storm's soul, the very essence Northern now inhabited. These feelings resonated within Northern like distant thunder, as if they were his own buried sorrows. For one breathless moment, he became Burning Storm, hating himself, nearly losing his sense of identity in the overwhelming tide. But then, something pulled at his attention. A world began to unfold before him, drawing his consciousness away from the abyss of painful memories. Northern found himself suspended in a boundless sky, carved into infinite dimensions where clouds drifted and spiraled around invisible axes. Tempestuous winds howled across the expanse while pulsating auroras shimmered with golden brilliance, bathing the realm in a mesmerizing dance of gold and cantaloupe light. Below stretched a landscape of volcanic glass, frozen at the very peak of cataclysm. A terrain no living being could traverse without being consumed by its fury. Heat assaulted him from all directions, so oppressive that even Northern, with his remarkable endurance to extreme conditions, felt sweat beating across his skin. At the heart of this world towered a colossal obsidian spire. Beyond being the nexus of this destructive realm, nothing about it made sense to Northern's mind. Yet a foreboding chill traced his spine as his gaze lingered upon it. Undoubtedly, it represented a crown of power that defied all he had ever witnessed. But its true nature remained elusive. It felt sealed, dormant yet threatening. A revelation settled into Northern's consciousness in that moment. This was the soul of a luminary not merely evolved, but realized and birthed into being. It had always existed, this essence interwoven into the fabric of their beings, waiting only for the moment of its realization. And realization was the key that unlocked the door to luminary. But how? Northern's mind reeled. How could something so fundamental remain hidden? A solution within everyone's grasp, yet no one had grasped it. Each drifter clung to their own perceived path to luminary, following different stars in the same sky. Why? The weight of this revelation pressed against Northern's soul like a mountain. To a sage like him, the knowledge was tantalizingly useless. A treasure map with half the journey still shrouded in mist. He still needed to ascend to Ascendant, then climb to Paragon, before his will could reach such palpable strength. Northern remained an anomaly. Despite not having attained Paragon status, his will stood uncommonly powerful. Yet these were merely the influences of chaos and void coursing through him. Though something more stirred within his true name unwritten and his attribute omniform, it was but an infant compared to what he witnessed here. This revelation, however, would help him cradle that infant with greater understanding. Finally, words shimmered before Northern's eyes like liquid starlight. You can absorb true name. Burning Storm was dead, had been dead for some time, yet his indomitable will had preserved the essence of his true name. And if his true name endured, then surely his talent remained intact, waiting to be claimed. Northern hesitated, a flicker of reluctance crossing his features. Then he steeled himself, casting doubt aside. Burning Storm had carried his indomitable will to this moment, ensuring Northern received this revelation. A gift of immeasurable value. The Paragon, no, the Luminary, could not have known the full extent of Northern's abilities. Now, with Burning Storm's will adrift like a masterless vessel, Northern could claim his true name as his own. Drawing a deep breath, Northern pressed his consciousness against the soul of Burning Storm, reaching for the essence of the true name, drawing it forth from its anchoring. To his surprise, he met no resistance. The world, however, proved so vast that it threatened to crush Northern beneath its weight. It was like a raging waterfall crashing into a tiny bottle. Northern felt his very being fracturing under the pressure, every fiber of his existence straining against the torrent. But he was no ordinary bottle. He was bottomless and unfathomable. Chapter 949. The Air of Nothing. The air surrounding Northern and the dead Paragon began to sizzle. Heat radiated so intensely it vaporized the atmosphere itself, sending tendrils of smoke writhing upward. Call's face darkened as he watched. Whatever was happening, he wouldn't stand idle and let it unfold. He had come too far. No one would snatch victory from his grasp. His jaw clenched tight as he shot forward. His figure melted into a black streak, cutting through space with breathtaking speed. Dante, still dazed from the recent clash, could only stare blankly as the prophet thundered past him. The man tore through the air like a midnight arrow, his legs churning beneath him, pulverizing rubble as he charged ahead. He was nearly upon Northern when a voice split the tension. "Hi you!" Before Call could register the sound, something crashed into him with the force of a meteor. Pain exploded across his body as he tumbled away, carving a ditch through the unforgiving ground. Byron's figure blurred like a phantom as he pursued. Just as the prophet's body began to slow, Byron delivered another thunderous kick. The impact sent Call flying with even greater velocity, a helpless projectile in the ruins. Byron vanished, then materialized mid-air. He twisted his body and hammered another devastating kick into the prophet. The blow altered Call's trajectory, sending him crashing into the earth below. A shock wave of debris rippled outward as the landscape trembled beneath their battle. Byron touched down lightly, a satisfied grin spreading across his face. His eyes darted sideways, drinking in the sight of his master performing yet another miraculous feat. The vapor around Northern thickened until the very air seemed to burn like a flameless inferno shimmering with unseen power. "Your body is evolving." Northern felt his skin tighten and harden. Something indescribable was transforming every organ within him, particularly his bloodstream. Liquid fire raced through his veins, scorching a path through his entire being. Eventually, Northern's consciousness pinged with new notifications. "Your body has grown. Congratulations. You have gained a third name. Congratulations. Unwritten has grown further. You have grasped a fragment of the essence of true name, you have understood what your true name could stand for, and thus you are slowly beginning to glimpse into the art of names. However, the art still remains elusive in its form, unless you are at the stage where your soul can carry the burden of names. Congratulations, you have gained new talents. Northern finally withdrew his hand from the paragon. He stumbled backward, his body swaying like a reed in the wind. Paragon Rizel's empty vessel crumpled to the ground, nothing more than abandoned flesh. Northern struggled to focus, his azure eyes gleaming with glacial intensity. Yet deep within those cold pools flickered something new. A spark of crimson fire nestled in the depths of his soul. Absorbing a paragon's true name had drained him beyond measure. Northern never imagined he could achieve such a feat if Burning Storms hadn't yearned to surrender it to him. Even so, the necessity of his actions left an acrid tang in his mouth. He wobbled as he fought to stand tall, wisps of vapor still coiling from his skin like ghostly serpents. The evolution had bestowed numerous gifts upon his body. He could sense their potency. But Northern knew he would need to examine himself more thoroughly to identify each blessing properly. For now, though, he lifted his gaze slowly, meeting the lieutenant's bewildered stare across the battlefield. Then he whispered, "Change name. Select the name you'd like to change to. Titan's Reckoning. Burning Storm. Burning Storm." A crackling sound rippled through the air like electricity dancing across water. Simultaneously, Northern felt strength seeping back into his limbs. Molten power surged through him, igniting every cell in his body. The system's revelation about understanding the essence of true names resonated with absolute clarity. Through Burning Storm's final gift, countless fragments clicked into place within his mind. The formation of a soul world began with truly grasping what a true name was. It confirmed what Northern had suspected all along. By embracing the essence of a true name, by becoming it, one shattered the boundary and comprehended the true weight of a luminary. Yet this transcended mere intellectual understanding. It was a truth that only a soul core could fully recognize and embody. But Northern possessed no soul core, rendering this revelation only partially useful. Nevertheless, it illuminated his role with crystal clarity. He was an anomaly, a stranger to this world, yet bound by its fundamental laws. Omniform granted his soul the unique ability to adopt any shape or form, to truly become what it mimicked. Until now, attempting to give Northern a soul core had been nothing more than hollow imitation. Yet Northern questioned this very conclusion. Was it truly mere imitation? Or was his soul simply not yet evolved enough to comprehend its profound weight? The truth he yearned to embrace about himself was that his true name anchored him to nothing. A paradoxical notion, considering the impossibility of true nothingness. Initially, he might have claimed he simply lacked an anchor altogether. But such freedom was impossible within the fundamental laws that govern trial. An anchor must exist, this was immutable truth. Yet simultaneously, his soul lacked the core that would allow it to be traced back to any origin source. The conundrum twisted into a profound possibility. For him to exist within trial's immutable laws, he required an anchor, and that anchor was impossibly nothingness itself. And this strange anchor to nothing granted Northern the ultimate freedom, to become anything. This paradox likely explained his natural resonance with the copycat system. The revelation sparked a deeper question. Had the copycat system always been thus named? Or had it adapted to mirror the fundamental nature of his soul and existence? This was also the same for chaos and void. Either way, Northern recognized only one true limitation, himself. The boundaries of his potential extended only as far as his self-perception allowed. Yet this wasn't merely positive thinking or self-affirmation. It was primordial knowledge, accessible only through the deepest will of one's soul. For the present, he would work within the confines of this imitation. But when he finally grasped the true will of his soul, the barriers between classifications and realities would dissolve. He could be a paragon while simultaneously existing as a luminary and a transcendent. The implications ignited twin flames in Northern's chest, a blazing excitement intertwined with profound sorrow, each feeding the other in an endless dance. Chapter 950, Destiny. Northern's gaze drifted forward to the man standing alone in the barren expanse. Lieutenant Dante's black hair whipped in the cold wind sweeping across the ruins. Night had long since fallen, and the winds had grown biting as always. No one had noticed their chill before, masked by Burning Storm's overwhelming presence. Now that the ferocious Stormbull had perished, the winds spiraled back like ghostly fingers reclaiming their territory. Neither of them felt their touch. Northern possessed a body that defied nature itself, granting him uncanny resistance to weather and even stranger phenomena. Lieutenant Dante was a paragon. Dante stood frozen, his mind struggling to make sense of the figure in the distance. Slowly, the color drained from Dante's face. His eyes widened as recognition dawned, the identity of the person standing before him becoming terrifyingly clear. A chill crept through his bones as memories flooded back. Watching this strange boy fight and kill without mercy or hesitation. Dante's lips parted, words rising in his throat, then vanished as Northern's foot crashed into his stomach. The world flashed white, reality itself momentarily erased. The impact sent ripples through the air, concentric circles of force expanding outward. Air blasted from Dante's back as his body tumbled across the ground like a discarded puppet. Northern advanced with glacier-like focus. He overtook the lieutenant's helpless form, seized it in his grip, and dragged him through the earth. Stone fragments scattered like rain as flesh met ground. With one fluid motion, Northern launched the lieutenant skyward, his body arcing helplessly against the night. Northern rocketed upward, a blur of movement, and drove his fist into the lieutenant's suspended form. The air split with a thunderous crack. Dante's body became a missile, crashing through debris before skidding to a brutal halt against the ruined earth. Above, Northern hung in the sky, his eyes cold stars observing the destruction below. Each of his strikes could shatter mountains and tear through fortress gates like paper. Every blow contained momentum, compressed, then unleashed in devastating bursts. He needed no build-up, no running start. His hands simply generated force beyond comprehension the moment they moved. This same momentum principle fueled his impossible speed. Already unnaturally swift, Northern's velocity increased with every stride. Momentum now answered to his call. He could simply reach out and seize it, bend it to his purpose. With each subtle shift of his body, and those around him, more energy flowed into his reservoir, though it wasn't limitless. But Burning Storm offered even more intriguing talent abilities beyond this. Northern examined his hands, turning them slowly before his eyes. I feel so powerful. Never before had such strength coursed through his veins. Felt right, it felt supreme. Northern descended from the sky, his form drifting downward like judgment itself. Lieutenant Dante had finally stopped moving, his broken body coming to rest just before the complex entrance. The massive structure trembled one final time from the impact of Dante's crash. Northern's feet touched the ground before the lieutenant, his face darkening into a scowl. I have always known you were up to something sketchy. Lieutenant Dante rose to his feet with unnatural smoothness, as though the devastating blows had barely touched him. A soft, sinister laugh escaped his lips. Nice to meet you again, boy. His brows knitted together, shadows gathering across his face. And to what do I owe this pleasant surprise? As far as I know, you have no business here. Northern's gaze turned to ice, his eyes focused somewhere beyond the present moment. Slowly, he shifted his attention toward the spot where Rizel's body lay motionless. You do. After killing my mentor, you have business with me. Dante's eyes stretched wide, realization striking like lightning. What? The pieces clicked into place like a deadly puzzle. Paragon Rizel had mentioned a disciple. He'd spoken of crossing paths with Dante. Dante had dismissed these details as trivial, unworthy of his attention. Now clarity washed over him like a cold wave. The boy Paragon Rizel had taken under his wing was the same one Dante had encountered at the Rift, the one with the uncanny ability to mirror his talent. And what did he do to Rizel? Why are his punches so damn powerful? No blood flowed from Dante's body. As a paragon, his flesh was nigh invulnerable, shrugging off attacks that would obliterate ordinary men. But these blows, they felt capable of shattering reinforced alloy walls. Every impact point throbbed with searing pain, demanding his attention. Focusing on anything beyond the constellation of bruises required monumental effort. To think that fate can be so unreasonable. He swayed slightly, fingers tightening around his sword. His gaze lowered, the eye marked by an old scar remaining perpetually closed. Northern stood precisely 10 meters away, as though measuring the distance between predator and prey. Silence stretched between them before Dante finally spoke. "Can I use my one wish?" Northern's lips curled into a humorless smile. "Seriously, it's quite shameless of you to ask, considering the disaster you have caused in this place." "One wish." Northern's expression hardened into something ancient and merciless. "Or perhaps this was the reason why you prepared such a scenario back then? Because you felt if you couldn't control me, you could restrict me. By honoring my wish, you expected me to honor yours." Lieutenant Dante regarded Northern with a face carved from stone, an unreadable mask that betrayed nothing of the calculations surely racing behind his eyes. Northern's voice cut through the silence. "It's a pity then, Lieutenant Dante, that I do not place value on things I can't afford. Honor, loyalty, those are principles I am too poor and selfish to uphold. If you're deserving to be killed by me, one wish or not, you will be killed by me." Something dark and knowing passed across Dante's features like a shadow across the moon. Say, boy, do you think you control your destiny?" Northern's brows drew together, but before he could respond, Dante pressed on. "Many people believe they control their destiny, yet they live life on autopilot, following paths laid out by others. When they crumble, they blame circumstances or others, never taking responsibility for their choices." The lieutenant paused, a ghost of a smile playing across his lips. "Destiny is a concept that has fascinated humanity for hundreds of centuries. Is it pre-written or do we have the power to shape it? I believe the truth lies somewhere in between." He shifted his weight, his gaze drilling into Northern's frost-filled eyes. "Destiny is not a fixed road map, but a path that unfolds based on our actions, decisions, and mindset. Many people passively accept what life throws at them, believing that their future is controlled by external forces. They follow the routines and expectations set by society, rarely questioning their purpose. However, this passive approach limits potential. Your destiny is not something you find, it's something you create. To take charge of it, you must move beyond comfort zones, embrace challenges, and take responsibility for your life. Success in shaping your destiny requires courage. It requires perseverance. It takes boldness to reject societal norms that don't align with your dreams and strength to push forward." His voice fell silent, the words hanging in the air between them. "Boy, the Central Plains is a dying continent, a continent we have killed." He raised his hands, studying his open palms as if reading a future written in the lines. "With my very own hands, I have decided to carve my destiny, defy what is societal normalcy, and I am ready to tear down any obstacles, either you, the kings and their nations, or the ruler of Riamgard himself." Chapter 951, Battle of Destruction. Lieutenant Dante's words hung in the air, thick and unyielding. They carried a resolve so fierce it seemed to press against the very walls of the air. Northern nearly buckled under the weight of it. Almost. But the fire inside him burned too hot. His indignation too raw to care about the lieutenant's willpower or his rank. Northern's eyes were sharp, cold, defiant. The eerie blue light swirling in their depths didn't just chill the air. It felt like staring into a void that could freeze a man's soul if he lingered too long. Lieutenant Dante met that gaze without flinching. His own defiance was different, older, tempered by time, yet no less dangerous. The crimson glow in his eyes pulsed like embers in the dark, a silent threat. Only a few strides separated them, but the space between crackled with an invisible force, two crushing wills clashing, each fighting to dominate the other. Northern wasn't a paragon. Defying one should have been impossible, an absurd notion like a candle trying to outshine the sun. 100 sages could stand before Lieutenant Dante under this pressure, and they'd struggle just to breathe. They'd feel the world itself reject them, because a paragon's connection to existence ran deeper than any sage could fathom. But Northern wasn't just any sage. The fact that he didn't just withstand the lieutenant's will, but pushed back against it, spoke louder than words ever could. Even he was beginning to understand it now, just how much of an anomaly he truly was. He wasn't pushing back against Lieutenant Dante's will with chaos or void. No, he had changed his name and was burning storm now. What radiated from him was a mimicry of a paragon's will, a poor imitation, a counterfeit. Yet, in the hands of his formless soul, it became something unbreakable, an impregnable weapon forged from sheer resolve. Maybe it was the fury drowning his soul. Maybe it was the indomitable spirit that refused to bend. They stared at each other, unblinking. The air between them grew colder, sharper. Unnaturally so, as if the world itself recoiled from their clash. Then, they moved. No, they vanished. One moment they stood apart. The next they collided. Space twisted. The ground shuddered. Even Fugel's metallic wall, an impenetrable fortress by design, groaned under the force. No, it didn't just groan. A devastating shockwave erupted from the point of impact, tearing backward in a rage of pure upheaval. The wall shattered, its massive frame ripped from the earth with a thunderous scream. Ancient trees, survivors of countless storms, were ripped from the soil like twigs in a hurricane. A titanic gust roared through the forest, threatening to strip the land bare. At the heart of their collision raged a storm of force, furious, tempestuous. Their power carved through the land like twin blades, splitting the earth in a frenzy of destruction. The very ground buckled beneath them, groaning as if tonight would be its last. Fugel had already been shattered by Lieutenant Dante's battle with Paragon Rizel. Now, this new clash didn't just threaten to break the land further. It promised to twist its remains into something darker, a scar so deep the world itself might never heal. Dante moved with lethal precision, each strike sharp enough to cleave mountains. Northern couldn't deny the flicker of admiration in his chest. The devastation in the man's swordplay was breathtaking. If circumstances were different, he would have studied Dante's technique, dissected it, learned from it. Omniform's demon of change and emulation was already reshaping his understanding of combat, revealing layers he'd never seen before. But now wasn't the time for revelation. A single distraction, a single dip in his killing intent would be fatal. And against a paragon like Dante, death wouldn't wait for him to blink. Northern ignored the devastation around him, driving forward with relentless fury. Invisible forces coiled around his fists, each strike carrying the crushing weight of 100 thunderclaps compressed into a single blow, yet moving with the razor's edge precision of lightning itself. Where their attacks collided, reality buckled. The very air between them unraveled with every passing second, unable to withstand the fury of their exchange. Lieutenant Dante's massive curved blade, some hybrid between katana and odachi, came crashing down. Northern didn't evade. Instead, he guided the descending steel aside with one fist while driving the other forward in a counter that should have shattered ribs. Yet, at the last possible instant, an array of mirrors materialized before the paragon. Northern's fist never slowed. It smashed through the mirror with terrifying force, sending crystalline shards flying, only for every fragment to freeze midair and hurl his own power back at him. He didn't flinch. Void force surged upward as his soul trembled from the impact. His invisible barrier buckled visibly, rippling like thin ice about to shatter. No time to dwell. No time to think. The battle moved too fast for anything but instinct. Their strikes became a continuous thunderstorm of collisions, each impact making the very air convulse as if struggling to breathe beneath their assault. Lieutenant Dante moved like liquid steel, every slash flowing seamlessly into the next, building an inescapable web of attacks. His speed alone should have made defense impossible. Yet somehow, Northern matched him. The white-haired teen moved in perfect sync with him, an impossible dance of blades and bare hands. Each time Dante's sword connected with Northern's flesh, it met resistance like a fortress forged from 10,000 celestial alloys, if such a thing even existed. It was appalling, amazing, exhilarating, that someone so young, so seemingly insignificant, could match his speed sent an electric thrill through Dante's veins. His own velocity was a curse gifted by his light-woven talent. Not true light speed, nowhere close, but faster than any drifter he'd ever crossed blades with until now. Northern wasn't keeping up effortlessly. Every burst of speed pushed him to his absolute limit, his feet hammering the earth with enough force to crack the ground beneath them. Each step sent spiderwebs of fractures radiating outward, the very soil disintegrating under the punishment. The air itself screamed in protest, the pressure of their clashing blows threatening to tear the atmosphere apart. From his vantage point, Byron paled, his eyes wide with disbelief. The sheer terror of their battle had stolen the breath from the world itself. Lieutenant Dante and Northern crashed together, rolling across the ruined landscape in a whirlwind of violence. A full minute had passed, hundreds of strikes exchanged. Yet neither had landed a clean hit. Their defenses were terrifying in their precision. A relentless barrage of blocks and counters that rang out like thunder, each impact hollowing out the air around them. Their speed didn't wane. It ravaged everything in its wake. The ground beneath them had long since been reduced to sand, and now even those particles defied gravity, swirling upward in the vortex of their motion. To the untrained eye it was pure horror. But to a true swordsman, exhilaration. Byron's veins burned with adrenaline, his heart pounding in fierce approval of the master he'd chosen to serve. At this moment, there was nothing. He desired more than to cross blades with Northern himself. Yet he knew that dream would have to wait. For all his monstrous strength, Northern was still just a sage. He needed time to fully harness the power he hoarded within. But that didn't stop Byron's lips from twisting into a hungry grin. Meanwhile, Call lay half-buried beneath a mountain of debris, his body aching from the impact. Darkness festered in his eyes. A bitter, choking anguish. Was this how it would end? All his grand designs, reduced to rubble like everything around him? No. With gritted teeth, he clawed through the wreckage until his fingers closed around a jagged stone. Without hesitation, he began carving a rune into the fractured earth, his movements frantic yet precise. The thunderous clash between Dante and Northern shook the wasteland around him. But Call worked undisturbed, his focus absolute. A circle took shape beneath his bleeding hands. Kneeling before his creation, he pressed his palms together, closed his eyes, and began whispering words too rapid to comprehend. The rune's lines pulsed to life, a sickly crimson glow spreading like infected veins. The air curdled with the stench of decay, the very light dimming as though the ground itself were rotting. It took minutes before the putrid odor reached Byron. One sharp inhale. His nose wrinkled in disgust. Hand clamping over his face, he whirled toward the source. And found the prophet. A snarl twisted Byron's features as understanding dawned. This heathen. Byron vanished into a streak of motion tearing across the battlefield. Call looked up as the warrior closed the distance with terrifying speed, and grinned. Too late. A tidal wave of crimson darkness erupted. A churning flood of pure decay that geysered upward like blood from a severed artery. The very air seemed to rot where it passed. Byron's body reacted before his mind could. Momentum died mid-flight as he twisted with lethal grace, boots slamming down in a landing that cratered the earth. Dust plumed around him as he rose, casually brushing debris from his immaculate garb. His eyes, cold, calculating, never left the spreading corruption. The gaze of a predator assessing new variables in the hunt. Chapter 952. Nessamat. The Plague of Rot. The rot slowly coalesced into something solid, its stench thickening, ravaging the air like a forbidden plague. Byron stared as the pillar of rot took shape, its presence dampening the surroundings. His mouth twisted in disgust. Okay. What in this wretched world is that? Opposite him, Call stood rigid, his expression stern as he watched the strange torrent solidify. With every passing second, the mass grew denser, blotting out the pale moonlight until, at last, it formed. A creature, if it could be called that. It resembled a massive mound of flesh crowned with a small, grotesque head. Within that head sat sharp, demented eyes, two pools of darkness framing a single crimson orb that gleamed with a deranged evil. The monstrosity lounged upon a floating throne of jagged edges, its seat adorned with a crown of thorns. Beneath it, the throne's base tapered into cruel, spear-like points, enough to gouge the earth with wounds even the world would struggle to heal. The throne floated for an instant, and silence gripped the air, though the thunderous shockwaves from Lieutenant Dante and Northern's clash still reverberated in the distance. Now they felt like mere background noise against the arrival of this new horror. The throne drifted downward, slow and deliberate, until it hovered just above the ground. The abomination's gaze locked onto Call, its eyes pulsing with menacing light. But Call stood firm, his posture sprightly, his glare defiant as he met the creature's stare. A grimace darkened his face, unyielding. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, until finally, the prophet spoke. "What?" Its voice was strange, thick, sluggish, as if dredged from the depths of some festering pit. "Why you summoned me." Call's sharpened gaze turned razor-edged. "Yes, I did." A pause. His eyes bored into the mound of flesh, unflinching. "Consider this your chance to fulfill your obligations to the one we serve. Call, your loyalty is questionable." Call rolled his eyes. "Save me the long talk, Nesimet. We all claim to follow the true origin, yet every last one of us hides from the gaze of the other origins in our master's absence. I've been the only one breaking my back for his freedom. I've sacrificed countless lives to drag you here. So spare me the lecture on loyalty and make this worth my effort." He turned away sharply, muttering as he walked off. "As if I needed another reason to be pissed. Now I've wasted my trump card too soon." The mound of flesh Nesimet watched Call leave. Then its massive, overgrown hand shifted, a single finger flicking against the edge of its throne. From the base, a jagged shard, the same blackened material the throne was carved from, shot forward. The movement was razor-sharp, almost instantaneous. But Call merely pivoted, blocking the spike's path with his elbow. The jagged shard shattered on impact, fragments exploding outward. Without hesitation, he drove another punch forward, cracking the remaining structure down to its base in a burst of splintered debris. His glare burned into Nesimet, still perched on its floating throne. "Do not make me regret this." A wheezing, mucus-choked laughter rattled from the abomination like a rusted engine gasping its last breath.
Tea, sing.
Tease, ing. Funte. Call tilted his head, his frown deepening into something venomous. "For madness' sake, why am I the only sane one shackled to a blood origin service?" The thought lingered for half a second before he clicked his tongue in self-reproach. Especially one straddling the line between rage and insanity. Nesimet's throne trembled. Then it began to rise. "What ado?"
Do?
Call shot the creature an exasperated look. "I don't care, Nesimet. Wreck everything. Do what you do best. Get angry." Nesimet released that strange laughter again, this time with a joyous, almost childlike energy. It juggled on its floating throne, making the massive seat jiggle in a disturbingly unnatural way. "Angry, angry, 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 angry. Nesimet angry. As the words tore from its mouth, a terrifying thunder rolled across the sky, black streaked with dull crimson. One cloud turned pitch black, as if carved from pure shadow. The crown of thorns atop the throne slowly peeled away, the metal melting like wax to reveal a rotting, fleshy mass beneath. The grotesque circlet now sat perched on Nesimet's head as the creature continued shaking its throne violently. With each movement, black lightning lashed across the sky in time with its tantrum. "Angry, angry, Nesimet, angry." Its eerie voice carried the words like a twisted chant, while the black lightning whipped across the landscape, tearing the earth apart in jagged strokes. Byron watched from a distance, amusement dancing in his eyes as the demented creature threw its tantrum. He absent-mindedly touched his desert-weathered chin, fingers catching on a single stray hair. Oh! A grin spread across his face as he tried to look down at the hair, though the angle proved difficult. Black lightning lashed past him, carving deep fissures in the ruined earth. Byron's gaze dropped to the fractured ground, his eyes narrowing. Something about these wounds felt wrong. A faint frown creased his brow. These aren't just. His suspicion proved correct. With a sickening squelch, a rotting hand clawed at the fissure's edge, pulling itself upward. From the depths of the crack, a crimson glow pulsed to life, and as the unnatural lightning continued its rampage, identical lights began blooming across the entire battlefield. Byron's amused expression didn't waver as more rotting figures emerged. They resembled humans but twisted by decay and time. Not undead. His hazy memories of true undead paled in comparison to these horrors. Their bodies were masses of putrid flesh, some still clad in crumbling armor, crimson plates and dirted white chainmail being consumed by rot. They wielded an arsenal of decayed weapons. Rusted swords, splintered arrows, corroded maces. Some even rode forth atop four-legged mounds of pulsating rot. Byron's gaze swept the battlefield. In mere moments, the landscape had become a sea of rotting horrors. Yet not a single-dimensional rift marred the space. As the Sword King mentally tallied how many foes he'd need to cut down in one swing, Nessamat's throne creaked as it slowly rotated. Then those deranged eyes locked onto him. Oh! Shoot! Byron's lips curled into a smile even as the words left his mouth. Chapter 953. Wait. The battle between Lieutenant Dante and Northern raged on, a clash of titanic force like two serpents locked in mortal combat. They tore across the ruined landscape, their movements weaving intricate, devastating patterns, leaving only wreckage in their wake. The ground, already flattened, sank even deeper beneath their fury. Craters pockmarked the terrain, turning it into a jagged wasteland, yet neither fighter faltered. The uneven earth should have disrupted their rhythm, but they moved as if it were nothing, fluid, unstoppable. Northern's spatial awareness wasn't a talent. It was an extension of his very being, woven into his five senses to form a sixth. Now, with his body further evolved, he wielded it with growing mastery, each strike and dodge sharpening his control. There was another way to sense his surroundings, through motion. He suspected this was how Paragon Rizel had detected people when he was alive. It explained how the Paragon had sensed him walking the halls even behind closed windows at a time. Movement registered strangely in his awareness. Not just people. The wind's violent howl as it tore through the atmosphere, stones trembling as they were hurled aside, the distant groan of what remained of the ancient walls buckling. Even the unnatural decay in the air, the way the wind itself seemed to recoil from them. Khal's sudden charge. Byron fussing over his new beard hair, barely sparing a glance for the monstrous threat before him. All of it flooded into his mind, seamless and overwhelming. The sheer volume of information made it hard to filter, to focus, especially when every second counted against Lieutenant Dante's relentless assault. If even one of those blows slipped past his guard, he'd be sent flying, skidding across kilometers before finally crashing to a stop. But the mental strain was crushing. The only reason he could endure it at all was thanks to Variolania. Had he not pushed himself with Omniform, controlling two clones at once, this sensory onslaught would have overwhelmed him. He might not have lost outright, but the cost would have been severe. A punch from Lieutenant Dante sliced toward him. Northern jerked his head aside, his gaze icy and unflinching as the fist whistled past his shoulder. Like a serpent, his hands blurred and coiled around the lieutenant's wrist in an unnatural grip, but the man's figure vanished like smoke. A scowl twisted Northern's face as he disappeared too, reappearing behind. Yet mirrors crystallized from empty air, multiplying his image. Dozens of reflections spilled from the glass, lunging at him. Northern simply raised a hand, fingers fused into a single blade. He slashed downward. A violent shockwave split the air, followed by a thin white light that flashed across every mirror. The reflections shattered like glass, dissolving before they could reach him. Northern was already moving, his body flowing into the next motion. Momentum honed his movements into a razor's edge, his bare hand now deadlier than any sword. Having trained under one of history's greatest swordsmen, his technique bordered on flawless. And as he purged the last remnants of chaos heritage from his style, that flawlessness grew nearer with every strike. The two collided again in a tidal wave of force, their impact sending shockwaves rippling outward. From a distance, all that could be seen were terrifying bursts of energy and the earth itself buckling under the pressure. Meanwhile, four figures sat rigid around a circular table, its surface split cleanly by what must have been a thunderous strike. The windows had long since shattered, glass scattered like ice crystals across the floor. The relentless roar of battle outside swallowed all other sound. Even the rhythm of their breathing seemed to disappear beneath it. Among them sat a gray-haired man with eyes like shadowed pits, swirling with something between remorse and raw anguish. He looked like someone who could pat a child's head with one hand while still warm from slaughtering their parents. Yet for all his darkness, there was a fragility to him, something that marked him as merely human, and as old as he appeared. When he spoke, his voice cut through the chaos, cold and measured. "Any word from the Governor-General?" "Not yet. The shockwaves from their battle are disrupting the atmospheric essence index. Communications remain down for now." The reply came in a shaky voice from a portly man with a thin mustache. At first glance, he might have been mistaken for some gluttonous bureaucrat, if not for the sharp glint in his eyes that defied the stereotype, though subdued now. "Give it time. Reinforcements will come." The old man's voice cut through again, steady as stone. The other two occupants of the room looked far worse for wear, faces pale, clothes disheveled, as the devastation outside rattled the very walls. One finally burst out. "How did it come to this? How does some nameless nowhere brat become powerful enough to tear the government apart from the inside?" The old man didn't glance at the speaker. His eyes stayed locked on the table's shattered edge, fingers idly tracing the splinters like they were pieces of a child's puzzle. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, "Because monsters never come with warnings. They don't rise from thrones. They crawl from graves we dig with our own good intentions. And when they stand, we're too busy admiring crowns to notice the knives." A slight turn of his head caught the light just so, something dark and unreadable flashing in his gaze. "You saw a nobody. I saw still air before the hurricane. I warned you all, but you let him keep his fangs." His breath left him in a slow exhale, weariness, not scorn. "Now you want to curse him for learning how to use them?" The fat man's voice came flat and measured. "Frankly, none of us predicted this. Dante and Rizel were friends since their cadet days. They served under my command, and while I recognized their potential, I never imagined one would bring us to ruin." The last silent member spoke, a pale man with frost-gray eyes. "The government wasn't wrong to cultivate a strong drifter. He's the most powerful we've produced in decades. Few drifters choose government service when private citadels and kingdoms offer greater privileges. Dante is genuine quality. What we should examine is our stubborn refusal to accept the truths he speaks." 3 pairs of eyes turned toward him. The old man spoke first, his voice a serpent's whisper. "I shouldn't be surprised such filth drips from your lips. You and Salmaldel were practically raised from the same trough." The gray-eyed man's gaze kindled with quiet fury. "Speak my friend's name with respect. He was the greatest shield this military has ever known." The old man's green eyes glistened like poison, his fingers curled, nails scoring grooves into the table. "Are you challenging me, Gordon?" "No veiled light. Merely reminding you." The door burst open. A woman stood framed in the doorway, lithe, radiant, heavy with child. Yet her presence filled the chamber like a storm. Chapter 954. Leary. The pregnant woman stepped into the room, her fingers absently massaging the red mark circling her wrist. She moved with the careful grace expected of her condition, Yet something unspoken in her presence quieted these battle-hardened leaders like a stilled storm. Leary paused inside the meeting chamber, her gaze sweeping across all four men with undisguised contempt before settling on the gray-haired figure at the shattered table's edge. She began, her voice cutting like chilled steel. Suppose every other man here lacks wisdom despite their years and experience. Suppose even you prove the greatest fool among them. Shouldn't your priorities at least differ from theirs, when your own son fights for his life, and ours on that battlefield? Her words cut deeper than any blade, piercing even the imagined heart of the wind itself. Not one of them lifted their head, let alone voiced an objection. Her words kept coming, their venom raw and unchecked. You disgusting, rotting maggots. Your greed, your stupidity, your childishness brought the government to this ruin, and now you sit around this broken table, a perfect symbol of your worthless authority. What are you even fighting each other for anymore? Tell me. She let out a bitter laugh. Oh, the Governor-General will send forces. They'll never abandon their precious high offices. Of course. Her voice turned razor-sharp. You keep underestimating your enemy. Just proves what pathetic leaders you've all become. In sheer, wordless disgust, she slapped a hand to her forehead. Bless all. No wonder people say citizens betray the government, abandon freedom's symbol to serve as slaves in private citadels and kingdoms for mere privileges. But I say this, it's never been about privileges. It's about your rotten leadership, you vermin. Failing them for decades. The fat officer shifted uncomfortably. Even his thick skin seemed pierced by her lashing words. Leary arched one eyebrow. Something wrong with how I'm speaking, Ergen? The fat man hesitated. A slight tremor ran through him before he cleared his throat with unnecessary force. And not that it's just. Her glare intensified with each stammered word until Ergen finally dropped his gaze, exhaling shakily. Never mind. Leary swept her fiery gaze across them all. When she spoke again, her tone had cooled slightly. I joined the government believing freedom shouldn't be a curse people flee from, but a force that unites. I don't support Dante's military rule. Her voice hardened. But can we blame him for reaching that conclusion? 200 years of governance, and we barely control 3 cities. We scramble for rift resources like starving jackals. Even Milgard Academy, our supposed crown jewel, lies abandoned by our own hands. Her palm slammed the table. Everything is in ruins. How could any sane man not question what you've done these past decades? Anyway, wah! Her words seized as the building convulsed as a colossal shockwave slammed into it. Leary staggered, nearly falling before Gordon, seated closest, lunged to steady her. She gasped as the child within her kicked sharply, then fixed her gaze ahead with sudden hope. Gordon's voice, frostbitten with age, cut through as he helped her forward. Enough talk. What now? Leary winced while lowering herself into a chair. When she spoke again, her voice, melodic yet steel, pierced the silence, undimmed even by the battlefield's thunder outside. There's only one path. We hope Rai wins. And we pray he does. Veiled Light's lips twitched into a ghost of a smile. Moments ago, I feared the worst when his presence flickered. Yet now, he exhaled. He burns brighter than ever. That he still fights at all defies reason. A grin threatened to break across Leary's face before she schooled her features. Naturally, anything less would disappoint. She paused, rubbing her stomach as she added. He must be the first man to hold his child, no matter what. As if answering her touch, something shifted inside her. But this movement felt different. Her eyes gradually widened. Her fingers dug into the table's edge as the stirring continued. Leary! Lady Leary! Commandant! They called out as one, chairs scraping back as they rushed to her side. Hands steadied her gently while she fought against the waves of motion inside her, her eyes flaring wide with each new surge. She locked gazes with Paragon Reisel's father, her voice breaking through clenched teeth. He's coming. The old man's eyes flew open. Move. Now. Find bedding. Anything soft. Ergen charged from the chamber like a bull, crashing through doorways. The complex stood in ruins, a lone survivor amidst the devastation. While it seemed like a miracle, it was no miracle, he knew. They deserved none. Burning storm must have intervened. Minutes later he returned, arms piled with linens. They spread them across the floor and carefully lowered Leary down. And so, as the earth shook beneath titans clashing outside, a legend's child prepared to enter the world. Burning Storm's power was overwhelming, undeniable in its might but technical. Its complexity stretched so vast Northern doubted he could wield it all effectively in this fight. Yet it exhilarated him. No matter how fiercely he moved, his muscles refused to burn or protest. His stamina held steady, unyielding. The ability felt like cheating nature itself. Northern sensed his essence reserves being tapped, of course. But beyond that, nothing.
Nostran, no toi.
Their battle had raged for minutes now, locked in a deadly dance of blocks and counters. Each clash sent shockwaves rippling through the air, weaving an invisible web of tension between them. Lieutenant Dante surged forward, his silver blade slicing downward to cleave Northern in two. Northern didn't flinch, just watched as the sword met empty air above his head, scraping downward as if sliding down an invisible pane. Sparks flared silver in its wake. Northern lunged, his bare hand spearing through the air with brutal force. Dante barely yanked his arm back in time to block. A mirror materialized at the impact point and shattered instantly, but Northern's strike had already carved through, only for dozens of new mirrors to bloom between his fingers and Dante's elbow. Northern crushed through them all without slowing. Yet by the time his blow should have torn through flesh, Dante's tyrannical speed had already whisked him away. The lieutenant landed skidding, breath ragged. Silence. Then, between panting breaths, his hoarse voice came. You've improved. Your crude swordsmanship has refined. Impressive, for such short training. Northern examined his hand, then raised an eyebrow. I'm not even holding a sword. Imagine when I am. Chapter 955. Battle-hardened. Don't misunderstand. Your pathetic lesson had little to do with my progress. Though honestly, this still isn't what I'd call good. His gaze drifted momentarily before snapping back. Fine. Maybe your pitiful teaching helped, since I did learn the basics from it. But right now, he smirked. You're still facing amateur work. If you think this is refined, then you're even further behind than I thought. Lieutenant Dante remained silent, his sharp eyes studying Northern like a hawk tracking prey. Slowly, he adjusted his sword's position, shifting into a razor-edged stance that unlocked countless attacking angles through precise footwork. Northern remained unfazed. Though the mental strain taxed him, he kept analyzing Dante's swordplay, forcing all other distractions to the edges of his awareness. It sounded simple, yet the effort wrenched at his mind, demanding relentless focus. He hovered near his limit, just one misstep from shattering. What would happen then? What would he even perceive? What could he react to? Call's presence had faded from immediate perception, but Northern still sensed the faint heat of his lurking form. That subtle, snake-like warmth hinted at schemes unfolding. Of course Northern watched for him most of all. Byron carved through hordes of decayed soldiers with casual swings, treating the battle like a stroll. Northern wished the Sword King would focus, but doubted anything in this era, perhaps this entire world, could truly command Byron's seriousness. Revanche shared the same attitude, though he saw things more as annoyances than threats. Both of them stood far above normal strength, and he was their master. Yet compared to them he felt almost insignificant. Damn, I really need to get stronger. Northern slowly separated his fingers. A swirl of dark light coalesced in his palm, solidifying into a thin, gleaming blade. He swung the illusioned hefter downward, splitting the air itself. Then he tilted his head, locking eyes with Lieutenant Dante once more. I've decided. I want to show you exactly how wide the gap between us has become. Lieutenant Dante let out a dry chuckle. Amusing. I get why you'd feel superior after copying Rizel's talent. But did you really think you saw everything I could do in that rift? You honestly believe you can beat me? Northern gave a careless shrug. Honestly? I didn't consider it in the rift. That realization came later. But what difference does it make? Dante? None. Because when my blade rises against you, you'll fall regardless. Lieutenant Dante's expression darkened. Such arrogance from a mere child. He shot forward like lightning, colliding with Northern in a cataclysmic impact that sent shockwaves ripping through the air. Their blades screamed against each other, trembling with pent-up energy before separating, only to meet again in an ear-splitting chorus of steel. The rapid-fire clashes came faster than a racing pulse, drowning out all other sound. Northern and Dante became blurs of motion, their exchange too swift for eyes to track. They appeared only as fleeting sparks of light amidst the devastation their duel unleashed. Every movement was precise yet fluid, a lethal dance where separation merely preceded the next crashing reunion. Their deadly waltz needed no music, just the shrieking song of clashing steel. Dante's sword lashed like a whip yet kept its cold, metallic rigidity, each strike hammering Northern's blade with crushing force. The impact's weight defied understanding. Even harder to grasp was how Dante made his muscles burn with every clash. Burning Storm's power surged through him, repairing stamina and healing muscle tears almost as fast as Dante's longsword could inflict them. Yet whenever Northern countered, driving forward with brutal attacks, he met what felt like an immovable steel wall. An invisible pressure bore down on him. With each exchange, the lieutenant's defense grew more unbreakable, his style transforming into something impenetrable. Northern had assumed, at the battle's start, that he understood Lieutenant Dante's fighting style. Now he was slowly realizing how mistaken he had been. The lieutenant disengaged abruptly, then lunged again with that same impossible speed, crashing toward Northern like a storm. Northern met him with a clean diagonal slash, forcing Dante back a step, only for another Dante to descend from above. Northern ignored the duplicate and pressed his assault, chaining attacks together. Dante batted them aside effortlessly, his eyes narrowing as his reflection failed to land a single cut. With a final parry, Dante shifted stance. His blade became a whirlwind, each strike scattering cold white light through the air. The luminous trails wove around each other, slowly forming a deadly web meant to ensnare and kill. Northern matched his speed, his eyes glowing with an eerie pale blue light as they darted back and forth. His hands moved even faster than his eyes. Maybe? He couldn't tell. Focus burned away all irrelevant thoughts. This trance was both mesmerizing and deadly. To break it meant death. Every strike sent waves of pain through his muscles, though absorbing his own kinetic energy helped dull the ache. The real damage came from his essence reserves. Northern had emerged from the limitless void immediately after waking, leaving no time to create void essence conduit clones. The mental strain of using Omniform to dissect Dante's swordsmanship while processing sensory floods from his surroundings only compounded the toll. Northern refused to disable the demon of emulation and change, though it was the sole reason he maintained this trance despite the relentless, shrieking onslaught tearing through the air. The constant data stream into his mind was permanent now, a consequence of his new body and Burning Storm's talent. With time, this would cease to be an issue. Yet through this brutal exchange, he was learning firsthand just how formidable and unyielding Lieutenant Dante's swordsmanship truly was. Not that he expected anything less. While Northern rarely concerned himself with government affairs, any man who dared to topple an entire continent had to possess this level of strength, if not far greater. Lieutenant Dante's feet slid across the ground as he launched one devastating strike, cutting through sword patterns with surgical precision to breach Northern's defense for the first time. The impact sent a shockwave ripping outward, hurling Northern backward. Yet he kept his footing, skidding only meters before stopping. He doubled over, crimson dripping from his mouth. Dante watched with icy detachment. Finally tasting reality? Northern lifted his head slowly, blood smearing his lips and chin. When Dante saw his expression, The lieutenant's stern face tightened further, a flicker of unease forced down. Chapter 956. Snitch. Northern grinned hard, blood staining the white of his teeth. The light in his eyes gleamed, menacing, a little unhinged. Yes, I taste it well, Dante, and it's sweet, just like the taste of your blood will be. Dante stared at the boy before him, his gaze seemingly indifferent. Even for him it was a lot to process. He was clearly standing before someone who looked no older than 20. He himself was 35. Rizel was 42. The two of them had chased the fineness of swordsmanship since their youth. Of course, with Rizel's broken ability, he was never as enamored with the sword as Dante was. Dante's own talent, however, could only shine through the mastery of an impenetrable combat style. So he began early, mastering the sword from a very young age. And yet, not even he could boast of reaching this level by 20. No, that had never been possible. At least it shouldn't have been. Everything about the boy standing before him defied logic. Unless he had lived a life before, there was no explanation for the kind of resolve he wielded. The light in his eyes, it was too fierce, too knowing, too ancient to belong to a youth. To belong to a 20-year-old. Granted, Northern was just days away from turning 17. But that didn't really matter. Northern's grin widened as he watched the lieutenant. What? Getting scared? Lieutenant Dante shrugged. His face remained caught in that strange place between stern and unreadable. Then he sighed. Tell me, what do you stand to gain from stopping me? As far as I remember, the world I'm trying to create is for young boys like you. A better world. One where equality isn't just a dream. A world stripped of selfish old bastards who hoard riches and glory. Those same riches that could make us infinitely stronger, while not even caring that they're doing it at the cost of our future. He gestured outward, voice rising with each word. Look at the world, boy. Look at it. We barely have a handful of paragons who truly deserve the title. Rift emergence rates are dwindling. And what do these people do? They impose absurd taxes and levies on what little we still have. Step into a rift without their permission, and suddenly you've committed a sin worthy of death. And for what? His voice dropped, sharp as a blade. To monopolize resources. Dante fixed Northern with a dark, unwavering stare, stepping forward with quiet resolve. They're so consumed by greed, they've lost all sense of priority. In over 300 years, not a single luminary has been born. Who's supposed to become a transcendent then? Do we, as a continent, even have the right to dream of producing a zenith? His words hung like a blade in the air. Have we ever asked when the real threat is coming? Northern said nothing, watching him silently. Since I was a child, I've watched this madness unfold. I've seen it choke innocent lives while the government smiled. It's rotten to the core. They're not afraid to use mundane lives as collateral, just to get what they want. They call it the greater good. But that same greater good only fattens their pockets and feeds their gluttony. He paused. The breath he released was soft, but laced with disgust. Ah! How people misuse that word these days. Then finally, a flicker of emotion crossed Dante's face. His brows furrowed as he stared at Northern. These are the people you and Burning Storm are fighting so desperately to protect. Northern stayed silent for a few beats. Then, scratching his head with the same casualness one might give to an idle thought, he spoke with quiet deliberation. Not to sound apathetic to the chaos brewing in the Central Plains, but I really don't care. If I want to enter a rift, I enter it. Let's see who's bold enough to stop me. So I guess I'm not bound, no, crippled by the standards your gluttons have set. If there's anything I care about, it's that last part, the real threat. His face sobered, his tone sharpening as he stepped forward. His hands curled tighter around the hilt of his blade. If you're actually preparing for the real threat, then why in the world would you team up with it?
I'm confused.
Dante's expression darkened at that. A frown tugged at the corners of his mouth. What do you mean? Northern held his gaze unblinking. For a moment he simply stared, expression deadpan, unreadable. Then he scoffed. Of course you don't know. You have no idea that the person you've allied with is a servant of a strange existence. One whose power is terrifying and boundless. Dante's frown deepened. It was no longer a reaction, it was suspicion. What are you saying? Northern sighed. The breath carried weight, like someone fed up with explaining the obvious. Are you going to reveal yourself? Or should I peel back every layer of your secret for him? A ripple ran through the air. A faint shimmer of scarlet thread bled into existence. And then, as if reality itself was being stitched into submission, Call slowly emerged. He appeared beside them, materialized. His face held a pale frown. "TCH. My cover's been blown." Lieutenant Dante's head snapped toward the figure he knew as the prophet. "You? What are you doing? Don't tell me. You've been scheming other things all this while." Call dismissed the lieutenant with a lazy wave, not even sparing him a glance. His attention remained fixed on Northern. "This is the last chance I'll offer you, son of Void. This is your destiny. Side by side, we could witness the descent of the King of Origin. We could usher in an era of peace. One that understands the weight of war. One that honors every drop of blood spilled in its name." Dante's eyes flared with fury. Being ignored like a footnote by someone he considered a pawn was one thing he was not going to tolerate. His face twisted into a snarl as he lunged, vanishing in a sharp burst of white light. He descended upon Call like a meteor, fast, fierce, unrelenting. But Call didn't flinch. He raised one hand and caught the blade mid-swing, his fingers locking around cold steel as if it were no more than a twig. The clash birthed a rippling shockwave that cracked the air around them. With a slight tilt of his head, a gesture almost bored, Call crushed the sword in his grasp. Metal groaned, then shattered. Before Dante could process the shift, Call's arm snapped forward, and a clean, merciless punch slammed into his face. The lieutenant was sent flying. He crashed into the earth with a brutal thud, then tumbled backward, rolling through dust and stone, skidding dozens of meters across the scorched ground. Northern remained still, arms loose at his sides, expression untouched by surprise or concern. He watched the scene unfold like someone waiting for a show to resume. "Popcorn would have been nice, but it's all right. I'll manage things as it is." Chapter 957. Shameless Father. Slowly, Lieutenant Dante rose to his feet, blood trickling from one of his nostrils. He had truly been struck by someone he once considered nothing more than a pawn. The prophet, a strange man, once left to rot in the military prison before being transferred here. Dante had only taken an interest in him because of the whispers, rumors that he spoke of strange things, of the return of Gaffer, of a special child who would reunite the Central Plains. Asental's Gaffer wasn't just some myth told to green recruits. Most militants had at least heard his name. But those who genuinely understood the depth of his deeds, what his legacy stood for, were rare. Dante and Rizel had grown up with those ideals etched into their bones. It had shaped how they saw the world. Rizel had been more than willing to become a loyal hound for the government because of those values. Dante too, in his own way. But he had come to see the rot beneath the surface, the disgrace, the unworthiness, and for that, he had Salmaldel to thank. Salmaldel, the iron wall of the military. Dante had once served under him. He was a giant of a man, not just in size but in presence. A fearsome sage whose name alone could still silence a room. And when he walked onto a battlefield, people felt it in their bones. Just as his true name implied, Iron Wall, he was immovable, impenetrable. And his values stood just as firm. Iron Wall had been his lieutenant at the time. Together, they'd carried out numerous operations for the government. But even back then, Dante had quietly paled at the absurdity of the foundations those missions stood upon. The Dayron Citadel has uncovered classified Rift Essence data. Eradicate them all. Label them as rogue scholars trafficking in forbidden knowledge. The Iron Vein mercenaries intercepted a Riem guard or shipment. Eradicate them all. Brand them as foreign puppets sabotaging international security. The Huthfire monastery shelters rift-touched refugees without permits. Eradicate them all. Declare them cultists spreading metaphysical plagues. The Iron Vein mercenaries intercepted a Realm Guard or shipment. Eradicate them all. The Frostspire engineers developed unlicensed rift tech. Eradicate them all. Accuse them of arming demented drifters with unstable weaponry. The Skybreaker Syndicate refused conscription into the Reclamation Corps. Eradicate them all. Call them deserters and anarchists inciting military dissent. And every one of those bloody purges had been followed by carefully orchestrated propaganda, painting the victims as terrorists, bandits, demented drifters. The truth? The government had been silently absorbing their resources, one region at a time. Yet despite all the looting, the state kept receding. The military's monthly budget was ludicrous. They kept recycling old equipment and substituting inferior materials rather than spending real coin to import superior metals from Realm Guard. Every day the contradictions piled higher. And Dante? He had reached his limit. But the true snap, the moment the ground beneath his ideals gave way, was hearing that Salmoldel, the very iron wall he had once idolized, had gone on to become the governor of Arcadia. And Dante knew exactly what that meant. Becoming a governor was no badge of honor. It was just a gilded seat for fat-bellied bureaucrats who knew nothing but how to fill their own pockets. That was when the fire took hold. That was when he began preparing for revolution. Meeting the prophet had been chance, or at least it seemed like chance. Still, Dante had made it a rule to gather whatever tools or allies he could. And the general consensus? They were going to reunite the Central Plains. But now it didn't make sense. Teaming up with a real threat? Just like the boy had said. No, the prophet hadn't found him. He had been the one to seek the prophet out. He paused. His breath caught in his throat as his eyes widened, trembling as the memory of their first meeting crashed back into his mind. By now, Dante was down on one knee, leaning heavily on the shattered remains of his sword. Shit! The prophet had been expecting him. He'd said so, word for word. He was also the one who first told Dante about Northern. That was the entire reason Dante had come to Arcadia, to recruit the boy. But how could he set foot in Arcadia and not pay a visit to his former mentor? The prophet and the boy, there was something there, some tether. Did they both deceive me? The thought churned in his gut like venom. Rage surged in his chest. But alongside it, restraint. Anger would only make him blind, and he needed clarity now more than ever. Something was going on, and he wasn't going to uncover it through blind fury. He rose to his feet slowly, his gaze settling on the two figures who now stood apart, the prophet and the boy. The prophet was speaking, voice sharp with finality. There shall be no chance for you after this. Northern smiled. Please do as you see fit. I'm not interested. You took 10 years just to get here. 10 years to finally stand and unveil your little plot. Meanwhile, I've beaten you twice in that same time. He tilted his head, smile deepening, eyes gleaming with unbothered ease. Realistically speaking, Call? Who's the better option to rely on? The question lingered in the air, like a blade suspended mid-swing. Call's face twisted in horror, his body visibly tense as he stared at Northern. His lips parted, hesitant, then finally, How? How did you even know? Northern raised his brows, slightly amused, then offered a small shrug. Oh, I met someone whose memories you tampered with. You wiped your existence clean from his mind. Not a trace left. Honestly, it was impressive. Clean. Precise. He stepped forward slightly, the weight of his words growing heavier. But it reminded me of something. Reminded me of what you're capable of, how you twist the minds of those beneath you. Night Terror. The monsters in the Red Mine. Me. His voice lowered, sharpened like a quiet blade. Subtle manipulations. Unseen strings. Guiding us all into a frenzy of bloodshed. All for what? To bring back the origin of war. Northern scoffed faintly. Can we even call him that? The man ascended to divinity after devouring his own son. That's no origin. That's a tyrant masquerading as one. A shameless father playing deity. Call's face contorted with fury, lips curled in silent rage. But beneath the indignation, there was something else, shock, and a sliver of fear. He swallowed hard, voice trembling. How do you know so much?
Chapter 958. Man Eata.
Northern chuckled teasingly for a heartbeat and tilted his head slightly, a glint dimming in his eyes. Knowledge isn't so hard to find. You just have to be willing to cross a desert so vast it breaks men, chasing after a tower that walks on legs of its own. He paused briefly, then added, his tone edged with a quiet weight. Where there's a will, there's always a way. But I don't know as much as you do. The underworld is gate-kept after all. It's nearly impossible to uncover anything about it. And even when we do, the tomes we find are nearly indecipherable without the help of all. These days, though, his voice lowered, skeptical. I'm not even sure Ul can still be trusted. Despite all Northern was saying, Call's expression remained shadowed, guarded and grim. After a long silence, he exhaled. At the very least, you are wise, even if you're still a mere child. Northern raised a brow, amused. Mere child? That's interesting. I didn't expect you of all people not to know. I suppose it's hard for most to truly see. I wonder, does Ul know? His gaze drifted for a second, thoughtful. She must. He let out a sharp exhale, brushing the thought aside and turning back to Call. His tone brightened with mock recollection. Right, where were we? You want to free the origin of blood and war. One sealed in a conceptual prison, something meant to trap not flesh but essence. So let me ask, wasn't your master sealed for a reason? His voice dove low but resonant. Why go through so much to bring him back? Is it just obsession? Some desperate craving for reward? Has it never occurred to you that deeper peace might lie in starting anew? In choosing a different path? Northern's gaze sharpened, cutting. Let's tally it, shall we? You've lived as a monster, become one, just to see him freed. A part of you was caged, and for obvious reason, by the way. You somehow clawed your way out, only to fail again. And now here you are, you still at it after how many years? 10? 100? He shrugged, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. Well, it doesn't really matter, does it? You're going to fail yet again. Call dragged a hand across his face, then raised his head and let out an exasperated sigh that seemed to drag the air around him down. When he finally spoke, his voice cut through the moment. Flat, emotionless, measured. We are not enemies. We don't have to walk this road. I don't want to fight you, Northern. I've prepared far too much to hurt you, to destroy you. And yet, here I am, second-guessing it all. It doesn't have to go this way. You could do this with me. He took a slow step forward, the weight of his words lingering. You'll be rewarded. In the end, when Cryos sees what you've done, how you've nurtured both void and chaos, he'll be more than grateful. Call rewards everyone who works for him. Northern answered with no fanfare. Right? That's why you've been breaking your back for the past 10 years, rotting in some forgotten prison. All in the name of reward. He paused, his gaze sharpening to a glint. Either beings from the underworld are unbelievably narrow-minded, or you're hiding something really sketchy. And you're not letting anyone in on it. Northern gave a small shrug, the kind that dismissed worlds. But really, what's my business with any of that? All I know is, I won't let you destroy my continent because of your stupid little plot. And I sure as hell won't let myself be used by you. Then he frowned, his tone turning even drier. At least not without getting paid. Call's breath came out hard, irritated. Very stubborn. Then he moved. But to Northern's surprise, it wasn't toward him. Call was bolting straight for Dante. Northern tilted his head, puzzled. Not only Northern was caught off guard, even Dante froze, startled beyond reason. All he'd done was linger at the edge, listening in on the strange prophet's conversation. And now, without warning, the man was hurtling toward him at a speed that shattered all logic. It was too fast. Far too fast for even Dante, whose speed felt more like a curse than a gift, to react in time, let alone defend himself. Call's hand clamped around his throat before he could so much as blink. Dante tried to respond, lunging instinctively to break free, but Call intercepted the motion effortlessly, caught his arm and snapped it. A sickening crack echoed. Then the wrist tore clean off. Dante's cry was raw, guttural and feral, as blood gushed, hot and fast, pooling across the broken ground beneath them. Call didn't even flinch. His eyes remained cold, with a dangerous, inhuman gleam smoldering deep inside them. Without ceremony, he took the severed hand, studied it for the briefest moment, then slipped it into his mouth. He began to chew. There was no delight, no hatred, just blank detachment. Dante's scream faltered as horror overtook pain. Paragon's body wasn't supposed to be this fragile. It wasn't paper, it wasn't meant to break like that. And now, he was watching his own hand be eaten. Call crushed the flesh between his teeth like gristle, then swallowed slowly, his eyes drifting shut in eerie calm. "Do not worry, I won't enjoy eating you." Northern blinked, then forced a crooked, half-confused grin. "Okay. Yeah, that's definitely not looking good." His gaze stayed fixed on them as Call leaned in and whispered something to Dante, words too soft to catch. Northern squinted, lips twitching in disbelief. "Looks like I'll have to rescue the bad guy this time." He exhaled sharply, fatigue creeping into his bones. But just as he made to take a step forward, something completely unexpected happened. Call's body began to shift. It didn't move like something human. It dismantled, coming apart at the seams, unraveling into a grotesque mass of sinew and warped flesh. Sharp, jagged teeth sprouted across the writhing surface, forming a chaotic maw that pulsed and churned as it spread. In a blink, the mass surged forward and engulfed Dante. It clamped down over him, consuming, enveloping, like a living shroud of nightmares. For a heartbeat, there was only silence. Then swiftly the flesh pulled back in, condensing, reshaping, until it reformed into Call once more. He stood where Dante had been, whole again, as if nothing had happened, except for the blood dripping from his lips. Northern blinked in disbelief. Chapter 959. Good Intentions. Northern was certain of what he'd just witnessed. He had just seen Call eat Dante whole, everything. The clothes, the broken sword, all of it. Call turned, spitting out shards of metal with a look of irritation, grumbling under his breath. "I hate having to do this." He walked slowly toward Northern, clinking and crunching with each step as bits of Dante's broken sword fell from his mouth. He spat one final piece with a metallic clang, then paused mid-stride, eyes locking with Northern's stunned gaze. A wicked smile curled on his lips. "Why do you look so surprised? If you're even mildly familiar with the underworld's more unsavory corners, you should have heard of the tribe of gluttony. We were cursed by a certain origin, devoured one another, until I was the last." He chuckled, low, somber, almost hollow. "Then again, maybe you haven't. That origin was too ashamed to let the tale spread. Had to bury the sin, right? Wouldn't do for his children to learn the cost of his amusement." Call's eyes narrowed as his smile widened, glinting with both mischief and madness. His voice came soft but carried weight. "Oh, don't look at me like I'm some nightmare-given flesh. I'm human, just like you. Cursed at birth by the very man who sired me. A mistake, he called it. I suppose that made the curse justified." Northern arched a brow, his expression folding into something between suspicion and disbelief. Call waved it off, his tone turning suddenly theatrical. "But enough about me. My grudges don't matter here. What does matter is this: I served Cryos, the Chaos Origin. From his earliest days as a tyrant, I watched him rise, watched him seize the throne of origination. And believe me when I say no one deserved it more. But the Origins feared him. He wasn't like them. And because he didn't pretend to be, they branded him shameless, especially after he ate his own son to ascend." Call paused, his smile slipping into a sneer. "Ironic, Isn't it? One of those very origins did the same. Cursed an entire tribe, his mistake, just to erase a blemish on his name. Northern stared, an unreadable look on his face. There was pity in his eyes, and irritation, but deeper still skepticism. Must have been tough. Call let out a bitter laugh. Boy, you have no idea. In the underworld, the will of the origins is law. No, more than law, it's truth. Their whims shape the very marrow of existence. They are the origination of all things, boundless in their reach, with or without the worship of men. But a tyrant? A tyrant is something else entirely. Born from humanity's will push to its breaking point. A will that refuses to stay human. A grotesque anomaly. An error when set beside the perfection of the origins. And yet, he stepped closer, shadows coiling beneath his feet like they answered his words. They couldn't erase us, couldn't pretend we didn't exist. Tyrants are inconvenient truths, too powerful to ignore, too warped to embrace. Call tilted his head, voice growing quieter now, tinged with something like reverence. But Cryos was a different breed. He was everyone's problem. A scourge even the most powerful origins wished to erase. Especially after he absorbed his son. He paused. He became too powerful. Northern watched in silence, absorbing everything Call said. Each word weighed heavy, but he sifted through them calmly, letting them settle like dust before a storm. Then he frowned, eyes sharpening. What a liar you are! Call raised a brow, amused. You think I wouldn't know? Northern's voice was even, but the tension beneath it rippled like a taut string. That the origins once united to imprison the chaos prince the moment he began reaching toward the void? And yet here you are, claiming they've never been united by anything. Call scoffed, tossing the thought aside with a wave. United? Against the Chaos Prince. He laughed dryly. Please spare me. That boy was dangerous, sure, but he was still a child of Cryos and Mathella. An unholy union, yes, but far beneath the concerns of the origins. You're probably parroting what you read on the murals of the Sun Temple. His eyes dimmed slightly, shadowed with an old bitterness. Let me ask you something, Northern. What do you think rifts are? Northern's expression tightened. A flicker of distaste passed his face. They're the thin fractures between this trial and the underworld. Call nodded slowly, lips curling in approval. Smart. You're well informed. But what is that fracture really? Why do you think I can just... He snapped his fingers, sharp and abrupt. And boom! A rift opens. Leviathan's hand crawling through it like a child scratching at the womb. Northern's frown deepened. I'm just as curious as you are. How the hell can you do that? Call shrugged nonchalantly. Technically, I can't create rifts. Nobody can. But I can weaken the barrier that separates your world from thin fracture. Find the weaker threads of the weave. Snap one here, tear one there. And the pressure from beyond forces the rift open. Northern's grimace turned cold, his expression darkening. Call paid it no mind and kept talking, voice smooth, deliberate. Yes, Northern, this world, this beautiful world you cling to, it's crumbling. A fragmented shell. All is doing everything she can to hold it together. Every inch of stability you feel is borrowed from her will. Northern glanced around with a faint smile, eyes sweeping the open air. Well, she's doing a pretty good job, I'd say. Fewer rifts are opening these days. Call leaned in slightly, that cunning grin spreading wide across his face. You think so? Northern looked at him, frowning once more. What do you mean? Think about it, Northern. Call said, resuming his slow stride, hands tucked behind his back. Two worlds, separated by a thin and volatile fracture. That fracture, it's growing, eating away at the past of both realms, spreading wider, heavier. The pressure it builds is immense. And yet, there's this little girl, from one of these worlds, wielding the power of dead stars to keep the fracture from seeping into hers. He paused, glancing sidelong at Northern. What do you think happens when that pressure keeps climbing? Northern exhaled slowly. It'll spill into the underworld. Call nodded. Correct. That's consequence 1. Now, consequence 2. Because those in the underworld, humans, creatures, even the worst of them, are forced to live under that rising calamity, they grow stronger, hardened. Meanwhile, you lot are sheltered, protected by a child. And consequence 3. Even with all her effort, all her struggle, the pressure doesn't stop. It still leaks through, like trying to slam a lid down on a boiling pot. The steam keeps pushing out from the edges. He stopped, turned, and stared at Northern with deliberate intensity. Did you know the continents at the edge of your world are far stronger than the central plains? A breath, then a quiet sigh. Dante was right in one way, but he was wrong in another. The real problem was never the government. The problem was Ul, and her childish ambition of protecting everyone from harm. Northern's expression darkened. Slowly, silence crept in before he answered, voice low. Still, she meant well. Indeed she did, Northern, just as Dante did. But look around you. This city, once vibrant, full of light and laughter, reduced to rubble, burned down by good intentions. Call stepped closer, eyes gleaming. Aren't you even the slightest bit curious? What may become of your precious world when those same intentions finally fail? Chapter 960, Wise Words. The answer was simple enough. Over time, the pressure was bound to keep building, and when it did, the lid would start cracking, splintering in places, spilling wide open. In the end, the force would get to a point too great to contain and would tear it apart entirely. If Northern had followed Call's explanation correctly, it meant Ul's efforts to preserve Triel were, paradoxically, accelerating its ruin. Worse, she was leaving her denizens defenseless. The very rifts that should be strengthening humanity, she was shielding them from. And when the moment came where she could no longer contain them, the world would erupt. Rifts bursting across the land, and humanity would plunge into another era of devastation. One where only a few could still stand and fight. Ah! Northern didn't know what to say. Call's logic held weight, too much perhaps. But that still didn't explain the leap to unleashing the origin of chaos on their world. And more than that, why in all the fragments of existence had that quiddity been sealed here? He hesitated for a moment before finally speaking. His voice was perpetually hoarse, but now it scraped out of him dry, coarse, almost grating. Fine. Let's say Ul is dragging her world toward destruction. Overprotective parents do more harm than good. I'm living proof of that. But Ul's failure is her own. What's it to you? How does that justify your asinine plan to drop your origin into our world? And why the hell was he even sealed here? In our fragment of reality. Not yours. Call was silent for a breath, then slowly began to grin. It was the kind of grin that grew wider the longer it lingered, and the more it stretched, the more it unsettled Northern. He was getting a bad feeling. You don't know. Northern's brow furrowed. Don't know what? A thunderous shockwave rippled from somewhere behind them. It cracked through the air with a distant roar, snapping Call's attention for a moment. His expression darkened, but Northern didn't flinch. He didn't even glance back. Call turned his eyes back to him. Well, I'm curious how you managed to get a relic of the first human civilization to serve you. Northern shrugged, casual. There's a little trick to it. Maybe I'll teach you, if I'm in the mood. Call regarded him with a stern, unreadable look before exhaling deeply. Then he spoke again, calm and resolute. I have much to do. Far too much. It would be unwise to waste my time on you here. I have Dante exactly where I need him. The conquest of the Central Plains will continue. Now that destruction of the scale has happened, Burning Storm is dead. The Central Plains won't be able to ignore it any longer. The citadels will stir. The nations will rise. The academy will fall. And the final phase of conquest will begin. He slowly brought his hand over his face, dragging it downward. As he did, his form began to dissolve, vanishing into the air like mist unraveling under sunlight. Yet his voice lingered, drifting on the wind. And we shall meet again, dear Northern. We'll finish this conversation and end our brutal fates. And with that, he was gone. Northern stood in silence, eyes fixed on the empty space where Call had vanished. Slowly, he scratched his temple, an incredulous expression sliding onto his face. This bastard just dodged my question, didn't he? A rustle of wind came with Byron landing behind him. He paused, exhaled once, then resumed his usual calm, unhurried gait as he approached Northern. He bowed with quiet reverence. You've returned, and I see you've grown even stronger. Northern glanced back over his shoulder, a weary breath slipping from his lips. I have, but this time I didn't enjoy it. Byron didn't reply at first. When he did, his voice carried a gentle lilt, almost like he was speaking to someone nursing a wound. I'm sure he would be grateful. Northern shifted his gaze to the lone building that remained amid the desolation. The Unification Complex. That was where Burning Storm's wife and father were held. And it seemed the fallen warrior had left one final message for them. Northern's chest tightened. The weight of it felt too much to carry. I don't have to if I don't want to. But they deserved the message. They needed it. He stood there, letting the thought linger before it gently settled. Why am I even stressing? I have Byron. A faint grin curled onto his lips as he turned to his summon. Byron. I refuse. You don't even know what I was going to ask. I don't need to. It's written all over your face. You want to avoid seeing his family, because it makes you uncomfortable. Northern looked away, as if caught in the act. It's not always about you, Master. I know how introverted you are, how much you like to stay in your own corner. But you can't hide there forever. Not when it matters. You cared for him, anyone could see that. So the least you can do is honor him properly. Don't run from that too. Northern lowered his head. His voice, when it came, was quieter. You don't understand. All my life, not just this one, I've never faced something like this. I've lived sheltered, disconnected. I've barely been to a funeral, let alone consoled the grieving. I wouldn't even know what to say. Then say nothing. Just be there. Your past life is behind you. Maybe your awkwardness and cluelessness is what gave you this second chance. To learn, to grow, to make things right. You, of all people, understand what change really means. You are a demon of change. And change is never easy, but it's always worth it. Northern stared at Byron, a flicker of vexation glinting in his eyes. He let out a sharp exhale. Why did I have to summon a sagacious sword king with a habit of lecturing me? Byron grinned. Count yourself the luckiest lord in the universe. Northern smirked faintly and stepped past him. Indeed I am. He made his way back to Burning Storm's charred corpse. The body, though burned, was still recognizable. Maroon hair clung to the scorched flesh, and parts of his lower garments remained, torn but intact. Northern bent down, lifting the body gently. The weight was more than physical. He walked toward the entrance of the Unification Complex. Once, this place had a pristine garden in front of it, with a serene fountain that danced under the sun. Now it was a ruin, its beauty devoured by battle. The tiled ground was gone, the basin of the fountain erased. The land bore scars, patchwork craters, fragmented stone steps, cracks like claw marks carved by fate itself. Northern knelt and laid the fallen warrior down with quiet care. Then he slipped off the white coat he'd worn under the guise of the white mercenary, draping it over Burning Storm's body like a shroud. Beneath it, he was left in a simple armless undergarment, the air brushing over skin chilled by ash and memory. He turned his eyes to the building. Faintly, almost too faint to trust, he heard something. A soft, trembling sound, wavering through the broken air. A baby? If you want access to fast updates or the full novel in high-quality audio, contact me now and buy. I offer over 300 complete audiobooks from Pocket FM, Webnovel, Audible, and more. No locked episodes, no subscriptions, just one-time payment via PayPal or Ko-fi. Message me directly on Telegram or WhatsApp, or check out the full list of available novels on Discord. Start listening to your next favorite audiobook today.